Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to tell you an interesting story about the first love between a man and a woman, which ended up becoming an intimate relationship. It's one of the most interesting mangas I've read lately. So let's dive into the modern world. One day, a girl met up with her friends to watch an adult movie. Being in her second year of high school, upon arriving at her friend's house, she couldn't even imagine what kind of movie they were going to watch, and suspected nothing. The movie the girls chose turned out to be so provocative that they couldn't hide their surprise while watching it. Besides, she didn't understand what was happening on screen. Everything seemed dirty and unnatural to her. The only thing that stuck with her and excited her was a simple kiss between two actors, because it looked truly beautiful. She liked what she saw so much that her cheeks blushed unintentionally. And she thought about how much she wanted to share a kiss like that with someone she loved. Her own thought surprised her so much that she couldn't help but feel embarrassed. And she tried to cover her face with her hands. A couple of years later, she was in a lingerie store with her friends, looking at the clothes as if nothing was happening. Since then, the topic of relationships between men and women didn't really catch her attention or pique her curiosity. Unlike her friends, she stood thoughtfully looking at the set her friend was holding, which she wanted to buy for an upcoming trip with her boyfriend. She insisted it wasn't just any trip, but one that included an overnight stay, where something could happen between them. The protagonist looked at her confusedly because she clearly didn't understand the hint. The friend next to her called her and made an indecent gesture to her, and very clear, which allowed her to understand what it was really about. She immediately got nervous and implied that she had already understood, while the other one, very happy, was saying they had already held hands. The girl commented playfully that she had just realized his hand was almost the size of her face. That's why she looked forward to what was coming. Hannel couldn't believe what she heard when she told her the theory that hand size is directly related to the size of other things. Realizing that everyone was looking at her because of her reaction, she looked away uncomfortably. Her friend, surprised, told her that although she didn't study in an all-girls school, she still has no immunity to those things. They got distracted when the second girl proposed a blind date to them, since her friend had asked her to introduce her to someone. Hannel, smiling, asked how handsome he was, and if he reached the level of beauty of the guy Jehi from the upper classes. She was immediately surprised that someone could even be compared to one of the most handsome guys in the university. The girl, amazed, asked her about the second guy, who was as attractive as Jehi. She immediately mentioned Kim Min-cheol, from the administration faculty, who was much more popular than Yihai. Hannel was surprised to hear a familiar name, but tried not to show it, while listening to them say he was handsome and cold like a celebrity. They left the lingerie store. She, with a mocking smile, commented that, compared to the neat and kind Jae Ha-sungbi, he looked like a real thug. To her surprise, she couldn't finish the sentence because a guy approached her stealthily and pulled her cheeks. Hannel, annoyed, asked him who he thought he was, and he replied by asking if she had rented the street she was walking on. The girls behind were surprised by how brave he was to speak like that to the guy they had just been talking about. One of them didn't know they were lifelong friends, since she studied in another faculty, and the rumors hadn't reached her. These two had been friends for a long time, together since childhood. That's why Hannel was so surprised that her old friend was considered the most handsome and so popular. They had been together for 20 years since they were born, since their mothers gave birth in the same hospital. By pure chance, their houses were also close, so their mothers kept in touch after childbirth. Since then, they always spent time together, and even went to the same kindergarten. Besides kindergarten, they also attended the same elementary school, where they continued to be great friends. Until university, they always played tricks on each other and showed each other rude gestures, considering it part of their friendship. Even in high school, when Minkal grew up and became the crush of many girls, she still saw him only as a friend As if it were fate, they also ended up in the same university. And before entering, he dyed his hair. They were too different, so every time they saw each other and spent time together, they behaved like the cat and the dog. Despite countless fights, they shared a hobby that made them spend a lot of time together. University studies exhausted Hannel because of how difficult the assignments were. But what saddened her the most was still being without a boyfriend. She understood that it was logical, because in her place, she wouldn't dare approach either if she always had such a troublesome guy next to her. Luckily, they entered university, and they started spending more time apart. So she finally had free time. That same day, she stopped smiling and greeted a classmate who suggested they go to dinner together. She was ready to happily, except when he suggested going to a new restaurant across the street that served pasta. To her misfortune, right behind her appeared that friend ready to ruin her plans. Minchul, with a grim face, asked her why she wasn't reading the messages he had sent her. She immediately told him he had scared her and asked why he had come. And then he suggested they go eat tteokbokki together. Hannel replied that she already had plans for dinner with her classmate, and that today she couldn't go with him. Immediately, he looked at the guy with contempt and asked him if he really planned to go with that guy. Minchul looked so threatening that the other froze, trembling with fear. Just with his gaze, he exerted so much pressure that the guy immediately backed down and suggested postponing the outing. In the end, he yielded to Minchul's pressure and said it wasn't necessary for them to go out just that day. The guy ran off so fast, wishing them a good dinner and a safe return home, that she didn't even have time to react. Calling the guy a loser, Minchul turned to the girl and told her they should go to the main street. Hannel immediately started hitting him, telling him he had no right to cancel her plans or treat her friends like that. He trembled with rage when she told him she wouldn't eat with him again, and that he shouldn't come near her, even by a kilometer. They immediately started arguing about who was to blame for everything that had happened. In the end, Minchul looked at her with contempt and told her that she was the one who should disappear. She, for her part, told him the same and, smiling, she made a rude gesture at him. Just as she wanted, he left her alone. At that moment, a guy she already knew approached her. Jehai Zumba burst out laughing and told her that she reacted very funnily when he saw how scared she was. She smiled awkwardly after he asked her why she was insulting the air in the middle of the street. The girl didn't want to say she had fought with her friend and said that they had been given an overly difficult assignment today. Seeing that he understood which assignment she was talking about, she asked him and found out that he also had it in his first year. She became happier than ever when he told her he could give her a USB drive with good movies he had collected back then. He warned her that he had it at his house, and that it would be better if she went with him that same day to get it, because there wasn't much time left. At first, Hannel thought it would be great, but she couldn't imagine the disappointment that awaited her. She certainly did not expect such chaos in his apartment, and mess with trash scattered everywhere, and nothing clean. She felt nauseous seeing piles of garbage, spilled liquids, and household items thrown everywhere. Jehi Zumbi, as if nothing was wrong, asked her why she was standing and offered her a seat, but she didn't even know where to start. After a few minutes that felt like eternity to her, the owner of the apartment finally announced happily that he had found the drives. He apologized for making her wait so long and offered her juice, but she was so tired she didn't even feel like drinking it. In the end, she accepted the cup anyway. And then she noticed how large his hands were. At that moment, she remembered what her friend had told her about that theory, and she blushed bright red. Jeji looked at Hannel, surprised, because he didn't understand why she suddenly turned so red. He paused when she laughed nervously and told him that he had very large hands, which gave him an idea. The guy looked at her face again, red as a tomato, and became even more convinced of his suspicions, realizing what she might be thinking. Jeji smiled and repeated yes. that they were quite large. Then he conspicuously raised his hand and pointed out that his ring finger was longer than his index finger. Janel didn't understand what he was referring to and felt uncomfortable noticing that his face was too close, not getting the reaction he expected from her. He started looking at his hand thoughtfully, and then she suddenly stood up, saying she had to go home urgently. She grabbed the first USB drive she saw on the table without thinking and said goodbye to the guy. Janel left him confused and walked away quickly, trying to understand why the atmosphere had become so weird. Her head was spinning thinking about what he meant by pointing out the length of his fingers, assuming that her friend must know the real meaning. She entered his room without thinking twice. What was her surprise to find him in a rather compromising situation in front of the monitor screen. What she saw shocked her so much that for a couple of seconds she couldn't say a word and just looked up and down. She tried to calm down, but couldn't stop thinking about finding her best childhood friend in that situation. Janel could have turned a blind eye, but it made her very uncomfortable to see that. Besides the risque video, a photo of her was also open on the screen. Minkal immediately pulled up his pants and tried to stop her, but she ran out and called him a pervert. He yelled at her that he knew what she was thinking, but that she was mistaken and that it wasn't what it seemed. And it was true, because he would never have used her photo that way or forgotten to close the door. Just 20 minutes earlier, he had arrived home, still annoyed by what Hanel had said to him. He saw a message appear on his phone screen from his friend, saying he had found a video she would surely like. At first, he was skeptical about what his friend was saying, but what he saw on the screen really surprised him. Minkal was sure he had closed the door, but the lock was broken, something he didn't know until his friend appeared. At that moment, an avalanche of messages from Hanel reached him, so he decided to mute the notifications. He tried to close the chat, but was surprised to see that she had changed her profile picture, where she was wearing unusual clothes for her. Putting that thought aside, he quickly threw himself into his indecent activity, which was soon interrupted. Upon hearing the whole story, Hanel started talking nonstop, saying she had to leave, and that she didn't want to hear any of it. She wanted to get away from him as soon as possible, and suggested they talk another time. Minchul was so hurt seeing the expression of disgust on her face that he couldn't help but cry while asking her why she didn't believe him. He saw her start staring at him as soon as she noticed his tears, and he understood that he couldn't hold back. In the end, Hanel left without saying a word, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Upon going outside, she froze, trying to return to reality after what had happened. All sorts of feelings were mixed inside her, and emotions from disgust to shame, and sincere confusion about why he cried. A couple of days later, she returned to her usual tasks as if nothing had happened, although she kept thinking about what happened during that entire weekend. Min Chul didn't try to contact her even once, something she noticed perfectly. She immediately thought that what she saw was truly shocking, and that she hadn't seen him cry since high school. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't even notice when her friend suddenly appeared next to her. Her friend started asking her if everything was all right, since she hadn't shown any sign of life all weekend, and was behaving strangely. Hanel didn't want to tell her anything, but she knew she couldn't keep it to herself anymore, and needed advice on what to do. Meanwhile, Kim Minchul was taking refuge at a friend's house, who was clearly uncomfortable because he never left. He looked thoughtfully at the room's owner when he, annoyed, hinted that it was time for him to leave. As soon as he said that his roommate was almost never there, the other immediately replied that they could kick him out of the dorm. Minchul was startled when the guy asked him if he planned to go see his friend from the English faculty. To his surprise, he started running around the room, and then dropped onto the bed saying he had to check the lock. He kept muttering things she didn't understand, and then said he should never have given her the door code. In the end, concluding that he should not have watched that video, he went and strangled the person who sent it to him. After letting his friend go, he sat back down on the bed and took out his phone, where he stared at something thoughtfully. He quickly found Hannel's account in the chat and started looking at her profile picture. Before, there was a picture of the two of them together. But now in her profile, there was a picture of her alone. Something in that picture together made him thoughtful and with a sad face. What hurt him the most was seeing how sincere her smile was in the picture, and how she looked at him with contempt that time. Meanwhile, the girl decided to tell her story carefully, pretending it was about an acquaintance. Even so, she knew Hannel was lying, and that everything had happened to her. And then she deduced that the guy was Minchul. Upon saying that he was almost naked, her friend replied what she had wanted to reproach her for from the beginning. Hannel froze when her friend calmly told her that she could have found the answer by using the internet. She couldn't say a word when her friend accused her of not even having thought about it. The girl slumped onto the bench, discouraged, and mumbled that none of this would have happened if she had used her head a little. Hannel was dying of shame, knowing that everything happened because of her fault. Minji tried to reassure her, telling her that if either of them took the first step to reconcile, they could fix it. Hannel regained her spirits and agreed, understanding that it was time to end the silence between them. At that moment, the girl saw Kim Minchul passing in the distance and pointed him out, leaving Hannel in shock. She immediately got up and said goodbye to her friend, saying they would see each other at the residence. Hannel knew that he had fled, even if he called it a misunderstanding, and she understood that it could be difficult for him to take the first step. She thought the best thing would be to catch up with him first, then apologize for the misunderstanding, and thus they would be friends again like before. However, by following him, she didn't even imagine what awkward situation they would end up in. The girl expected they would simply continue talking like before. But a decisive moment arrived that affected them both. No one could imagine that an unexpectedly close contact would be the turning point in their relationship. Shortly before everything happened, Hannel, just as she wanted from the beginning, ran with all her might after her friend. Kim Minchul froze in surprise to see his friend running straight towards him and shouting his name. Clearly, he had no intention of starting an awkward conversation. And he also ran away, trying to flee from the girl. Without stopping running, she yelled at him why he was running away, and then told him she needed to talk to him. Although he refused to talk, she kept trying to reach him until she bumped into a guy passing by. Due to the sudden collision, all the coffee in her cup accidentally ended up on her white t-shirt. Hannel immediately apologized for bumping into him, but he was more concerned about his t-shirt than the ruined drink. The guy kindly admitted that he was also at fault and suggested she give him her number to transfer the money for the dry cleaning. Thinking Minchial had already left, she said she wanted to pay for the drink, but he immediately covered her chest with his bag. Before she could protest, he took her hand and quickly led her to the student activities room. The stranger tried to stop them, but Minkal's fierce look made him desist immediately. A couple of minutes later, they finally reached the correct room, where the guy started looking for a new t-shirt for her. Hannel mumbled that she could have covered herself with her bag and arrived at the dorm like that, but he didn't accept that idea. Minkal told her he would give her a club t-shirt and that she should leave when she finished changing. She thanked him for the help and looked at her t-shirt with disgust, which was sticky and completely transparent. Unintentionally, she thought her t-shirt was so sticky that she had to take it off before it dried. Realizing that she almost took off her t-shirt without thinking, she concluded that it wasn't bad, since for them that was normal. Upon hearing his warning about the removed t-shirt, Minkal froze as soon as he heard the voices of other students. Students! Janel cursed in her mind upon hearing the unfamiliar voice of a guy asking Minkal what he was doing there. After hearing the suggestion to go grab a drink, he replied in a sinister tone that today it was better if they drank without him. The guy asked him to step aside to leave his things, but he just told him to give them to him. His tone and expression were so convincing that his friend couldn't refuse his request, making sure all students moved as far away as possible. He returned looking for Janelle. He couldn't help but be surprised to see the embarrassed girl hiding inside one of the lockers. His face turned even redder when, upon asking her why she wasn't coming out, she said she couldn't get out. She looked so ashamed and sad that her friend couldn't help but let out a laugh seeing the scene. As always, he called her a piglet and told her she was very funny, adding that she should have done sports with him. As soon as he accidentally looked at her bare chest, he immediately closed his eyes and asked her to get out quickly. Upon hearing that she said she couldn't get out, he started helping her, trying to pull her hands towards him. At first, Janelle was happy to be able to get out, but she didn't manage to get her legs out and fell directly onto her friend. The guy stayed still, seeing Janelle on top of him, looking directly into his eyes. The awkward silence between them was broken when someone tried to force the door open, making the girl startle. The student they already knew tried to enter the club again, but he was surprised to see that the door was locked. Hannah got so scared that, unable to help herself, she pressed against the guy who was on the floor while her friend banged on the door. The girl was so worried about the danger that she didn't even notice her chest was pressed against his face. Min-kal remained motionless upon feeling his body's reaction to the contact and tried to calm down. Luckily, the girl finally moved her face away when she confirmed that the student had left. Before, they had never seen their relationship as anything more than friendship, which always surprised their acquaintances. One day back in high school, as always, they responded sarcastically to questions about their relationship. He had never seen Hanul as a girl, and he was sure they would never be more than just friends. Then, a classmate asked him directly if he was sure he would never see her as a girl. Like him, she also only saw him as a friend, which is what he had always been to her. Min-kal declared with complete certainty that he was so convinced of that he would even be willing to rip off his reproductive organ. When he asked Hanul the same question, she reluctantly replied that she would shave her head if she ever saw him as a guy. Seeing that he was bothering her again as always, she only got even angrier. Unable to stand his teasing any longer, she grabbed him by the nape of his neck and pulled him roughly, forcing him to be quiet. She shook him hard, telling him that she could never feel anything for someone like him. But what had just happened impacted her so much that she needed several minutes to recover. Upon hearing him ask her to move her chest away, only then did she accidentally notice his exposed abs. Min-kal tried to explain to her that he had locked the door, and that she didn't need to worry. But he was so nervous that he blushed. Seeing how embarrassed he was, she couldn't help but remember that time when he shed tears. She couldn't understand why she felt the same inside as that time. Finally, Hanul managed to calm down when he, uncomfortably, apologized for having crushed his hand on his chest. He tried to explain that it was she who had crushed his hand. And at that moment, looking down, her face instantly turned red. At that moment, it was as if she finally understood what had happened. And she moved away, apologizing desperately. She backed away so much that she didn't even realize she bumped into the closet behind her, causing the books to fall. After that collision, Min-kal instantly regained his composure and threw a cold look at the girl. And heavy, he threw the t-shirt at her, stood up immediately, and congratulated himself for having remained calm. Although it cost him a lot of effort, she turned around distrustfully and asked him what he wanted. And then she quietly approached from behind. Her eyes opened in surprise when she apologized for leaving so suddenly that time. Then, as usual, she ruffled his hair and said that after today, all her muscles would hurt. Before she could react, she disappeared in an instant, saying she had to do her homework, and said goodbye. After many hours, Hanul was still dwelling on her homework, the same one she hadn't done for all these days. Minji calmly asked her how much progress she had made on her assignment, but the answer was quite discouraging. The rest of the team was also still working on the group animation assignment, and they stayed late. The girl said she specialized in design and that she didn't like drawing people, which fortunately was not necessary for this job. Although Hannah had very good drawing skills, she still struggled to concentrate on the work. Her face turned bright red when she remembered her friend, who was right in front of her. Knowing she had to regain her composure somehow, she quickly got up and went to the bathroom. Alone with her thoughts, she slapped her cheeks to try to erase those memories. She was clear that she was losing her mind, since she couldn't stop thinking about her friend. She tried to remind herself that it was Kim Min-chul, and that she shouldn't act like that just because she had seen his muscles. Meanwhile, Kim Min-chul was in his room. And just like her, he couldn't get those ideas out of his head. He also slapped his face when he remembered again how her chest looked. Unintentionally, he thought he was crazy, considering that he blushed in such a situation. He tried to convince himself that it was just something physiological, and not because Hanan was the one in front of him. However, he kept thinking about her, despite all his attempts to stop this flow of thoughts and fantasies. Meanwhile, she was so focused on her work that, on the phone, she immediately replied that she was going on a blind date. Min-chul couldn't even imagine what her plans were, and kept wondering what she would be doing at that moment. The next day, the girl asked Minji for help, who was quite surprised by her unexpected decision. She couldn't understand why she had suddenly changed her mind, since she always rejected those proposals without hesitation before. The girl calmly replied that she needed to meet new people, since her routine had been too monotonous lately. As soon as Minji told her the makeup was ready, and that they would do the hair afterward, she ran off to change. At first, Minji thought she was going to try too hard, but she was shocked to see how badly she had dressed. Her choice of clothing was so inappropriate for the place, the event and the occasion, that Minji took time to recover from the shock. In the end, she decided to take control and choose the clothes for herself. And afterward, the girl went on the date. Hannah's friends were surprised by how beautiful and different she looked, although at first she felt uncomfortable. She replied shyly that Minji had helped her. And then, smiling, she followed the girls. A call from Min-chul appeared on her phone screen, but she decided to wait and answer him later. They finally arrived at the indicated place where the guys were already waiting for them. The guy sitting in the center was the brunette's friend. And with a big smile, he invited them to the table where plates were already served. The girls immediately integrated into the atmosphere and greeted the guys with smiles. But Janel stayed a little aside, although she felt very uncomfortable in that unknown group. She still greeted the new acquaintances. Two of the guys were so impressed by how pretty and beautiful she looked that they could barely return the greeting. Only the guy sitting next to the wall seemed to keep his composure and greeted her with a calm smile. The loudest in the group, Chul. He was in his first year of physical education and proposed that everyone toast. Hannah had never tried soju before, and she was surprised when they told her they first had to toast to the meeting. Although she felt like she couldn't relax, she still followed the example of the others and raised her glass just like them. At that moment, she couldn't even imagine that 1 hour after starting to drink, she would loosen up so much and get so cheerful. She liked the drink so much that in the blink of an eye, she finished 3 whole bottles of soju. She was quite surprised when the shy boy next to her offered her water, telling her she might have a hangover tomorrow. Hannah gladly accepted the glass and looked closely at the cap when they asked if she knew a game. She said she had heard of it, but had never played it, and agreed to try that drinking game. She confidently asserted that she would beat them all on the first try, but it seemed she didn't understand how difficult it was. Sung-yoon, who was next to her, explained to her that if she hit the cap with her fingers from top to bottom, it would fly off perfectly. The others started pressuring her, saying she wouldn't succeed on the first try. But the result exceeded all expectations. Her eyes shone with joy seeing everyone's reaction, and she thought she had won. She applauded Sung-joon excitedly, telling him how awesome he was for achieving it on the first try. The girl loved spending time with them, and she could finally relax and show herself as she is. Sungjun, a bit embarrassed, asked her if he could ask her a personal question, and she agreed. At first it was hard for him, but he still surprised her by asking if she had a boyfriend. He himself was surprised and asked her if that handsome boy, and super popular at the university, was her boyfriend. She got angry upon realizing that, precisely because Kim Min-cheol was always with her. She didn't have a boyfriend. Her friend, who was sitting next to her, laughed at the face she made and explained that they were only childhood friends, not a couple. Hanwell protested, saying they weren't dating, as many might have thought before. She said they had simply been together since they were little, and that there were no secrets between them. That's why they seemed so close. Upon thinking about the phrase about having no secrets, she unintentionally remembered what had happened to her recently. As soon as the details came to her mind, she slapped herself, leaving everyone around her surprised. She started wondering how she could have completely forgotten it, and got annoyed because that memory came back to her head. The boy at the next table loudly ordered pasta and made a typical hand gesture while holding the ketchup. That impacted her even more, making her remember the details of what had recently happened once again. She tried not to look in that direction and distract herself, but again, unintentionally, she saw the guy shaking the bottle in a very characteristic way. Knowing she had to forget that incident somehow, she decided that tonight she was going to drink, and she finished the bottle of soju. After that, her head fell hard onto the table, which worried those nearby even more. A few seconds later, she snapped back because her phone was vibrating with messages from Kim Min-cheol. She was surprised that he acted as if nothing was wrong, while she had accepted a boring date just to forget everything. Hanel closed her eyes again, confused, trying to understand what was happening to her. At that moment, she felt Seung-yoon's hand on her head, worried about whether she was okay. He asked her if her head hurt, but she didn't confess that it hurt terribly, inside and out. The boy informed her that the others had gone to get something for the hangover, and asked her if she had a lump on her forehead after the fall. He touched her back to get her attention, and asked her to turn her head so he could check her forehead. Everything looked blurry to Hanyul when Seung-yoon got closer than allowed, as if it were fate. At that moment, Min-cheol appeared, announcing his presence out loud. It turned out he worked there as a waiter, and brought 2 beers they had ordered earlier. Just at that moment, the others returned, wondering how Hanel was feeling. They laughed that she had clearly overdone it with the alcohol, but they froze upon seeing Kim Min-cheol. At first, Hanel thought she was hallucinating, but what surprised her the most was that she almost called him handsome. She decided she was still drunk and beside herself and thought she might pass out at any moment. Just before her forehead hit the table, a large male hand appeared before her. Kim Min-cheol annoyedly asked her if she was really so drunk that she wanted to bang her head against the table. After saying this, he slowly turned around and saw that the others were behind, watching attentively. He immediately asked how much she had drunk, but they couldn't give him a clear answer. Min-cheol was surprised by the amount she had drunk and started scolding her, telling her she shouldn't have drunk so much. Rummaging in his apron, he offered her a can of liquid and told her not to drink any more, and then added that he had to work. He left the group of young people so quickly that he didn't even hear them whispering among themselves how handsome he was. Hanel got up calmly and said she was going out to get some fresh air because she was very hot from the alcohol. What was her surprise to find Min-cheol taking out the trash. She annoyedly asked him why he hadn't told her where he worked, but he replied that he had told her. With a satisfied smile, he took out a lollipop and asked her if she was ashamed to be seen flirting with a guy. Hanel gave him back the can and told him to take away what he had secretly taken from the store, but he assured her he had already paid for it. The girl was surprised that he had worried about her so far in advance and withdrew her hand. To her surprise, he demanded that she give it back, saying that he shouldn't have been so kind to her. Minkal muttered angrily, how dare she have fun? And not answer the phone when he called. Defiantly, she drank the contents in one gulp. And froze when he leaned in. And noticed that she had put on makeup. The girl got nervous from that attention. But he, as always, said that no matter how many stripes you paint on a pumpkin, it doesn't turn into a watermelon. When she told him to look at himself first, he confidently replied that since the beginning he was already a watermelon. Meanwhile, the group of friends was still shocked by what had happened. The girl still couldn't get over the beauty of Minchal's face that she had just seen. She kept saying that in person, he was much more handsome than in photos. And that surely, he just didn't photograph well. Her friend was quite surprised when they started talking about other handsome guys. And they remembered Yehui from his faculty. The girls immediately commented that he was also very attractive. But that his beauty was different from Kim Minchal's. Sung Yun confessed that he was good friends with Yehui's older brother, who had told him that there were many rumors circulating about Kim Yehui. The girls immediately pressured him to tell those rumors, since they both felt sympathy and admiration for him. Meanwhile, Minchal picked up his phone and, surprised, realized that it was already time to go back. He told Hanul that 15 minutes had already passed, and that he hadn't even realized how quickly time flew while talking to her. In the end, he gave his friend a smile and asked her if any of those guys interested her. She immediately looked at him and asked what he gained by knowing, to which he replied that someone could be her first boyfriend. Hanul clearly wasn't happy with his comment about investigating someone and started hitting him on the back. Finally, he stroked her head and told her he had to leave, and that if she got a boyfriend, he would test him. When she was left alone, she remembered that it was also time to go back. And she noticed that it had been a long time since they had talked like that, thinking that her decision to go on a blind date might have been for the best. She ran into Sungyun by chance. As soon as she asked him why he had left, he immediately started explaining that he was worried because she was taking too long. Her friends were so engrossed in the interesting conversation that they didn't even notice he had left. They were actively discussing the rumors they had heard about Yi Hui Zumbi. And they concluded that, even if they were just rumors, they were quite shocking. The girls were surprised that someone like him could lead a double life and be a motel fanatic. However, they didn't even imagine that their crush was hanging out in one of those motels right at that moment. He was having a great time with a girl who was in love with him. She clearly didn't understand what was wrong with him, because the whole time he seemed to be in the clouds and didn't interact at all. Even when she asked him a direct question, he remained lost in his thoughts and barely responded to her. Jeji just stroked her head thoughtfully and said it seemed like he had forgotten something. The girl directly asked him why he couldn't concentrate on her, and if it had anything to do with them doing everything differently today. He remained thoughtful and replied that it was because he felt he had forgotten something important. Finally, he had a revelation. And with a look of horror, he said he had to turn in the assignment before midnight. The girl couldn't believe he was willing to just leave like that. But he just apologized to her and said they would see each other again, even though he had behaved quite badly towards her. He didn't feel guilty and was smiling. With those thoughts, he arrived home. He took a relaxed shower and started doing the assignment, holding the 3 USB drives in his hand. He decided to finish quickly and looked for the videos. What was his surprise to realize that he had the correct drive, and that he had lent Janel the wrong one. Meanwhile, Han Il was on the street with her new friend, and confidently asserted that she wasn't cold. Sun Yan suddenly started talking again about how close he was, and Min Chial were. The girl uncomfortably agreed, saying it was because they were childhood friends, and not just acquaintances. She frowned again when he asked again if there were no romantic feelings between them, since they looked like a couple. Upon making sure she wouldn't have come if she had a boyfriend, he suddenly confessed that he liked her. He knew that might sound a bit unexpected, considering they barely knew each other. Even so, he managed to smile and proposed that she be his girlfriend, which totally surprised her. They didn't even know that Kim Min-chil had secretly overheard that whole conversation, who clearly didn't expect them to get interested in her so quickly. The next day, he was traveling tired on the train, where by chance he saw Min-jae. She replied that she had also decided to visit her parents, and then asked him why he was traveling alone, and not with Hanul. He just mumbled thoughtfully that, apparently, she is dating her boyfriend. At first, the girl reacted as usual, very calmly, but she was still surprised when she understood what he meant. The news shocked her so much that she immediately repeated aloud her question of when she was supposed to have a boyfriend. Upon learning that everything happened after a blind date, she immediately looked for her phone. It seems Minji became convinced of this when she saw that the girl, who used to reply very quickly, was not answering now. She got distracted seeing him smilingly petting the university cat, which had grown quite a bit. The girl was surprised by how calm he was, since she expected a completely different reaction from him. He was surprised when she told him that he used to always push away boys who tried to get close to Hanul. Min-cheol proudly declared that he didn't push them away. He was just protecting Hanul from bad people. Upon hearing the question of whether she had to ask his permission, he unintentionally remembered the moment they argued. In the end, he said she was already an adult and could make her own decisions. Despite what he said, his face looked terrifying when he warned that, if he dared to do anything bad, she wouldn't have a good time. Meanwhile, Hanul was hanging out calmly at her new friend's house and admiring his cute hamster. She smiled tenderly, saying she wanted a soda, while thinking that in the end, they had decided to try dating together. The girl thought that relationship couldn't be called serious, and that it looked more like flirting. When mentally comparing this to the process of getting to know each other well before the first date, she wondered if she had applied her lipstick well today. Seeing it as a good opportunity, she decided it didn't matter if they dated seriously or just hung out a couple of times. Smiling, she opened her laptop when he proposed that she start with her homework. Hanul said tiredly that she just had to watch a masterpiece of cinema and write a review about it. Sung-yeon asked her if she wanted him to watch the movie with her, when she mentioned that she had to write well so as not to get a bad grade. She thanked him with a smile for offering to help with the homework and for watching the movie together. As soon as he sat down next to her, she immediately thought about how close they were, so close that their shoulders almost touched. She immediately started checking the list of movies she had on the USB drive Yehai Zumbai had given her. What was her surprise to see that the movie was quite risque and vulgar. Hanul couldn't believe what she was seeing, and she instantly blushed with embarrassment. Seung-yoon was also very surprised, since he expected to watch a normal movie, like the usual ones. The girl was so shocked that the only thing she could think of was to slam the laptop shut. She tried to justify herself by saying that sometimes world masterpieces are explicit, and that she hadn't put it on purpose. Hanul immediately realized that she had grabbed the wrong drive, and noticed that it was the same movie they watched in high school. Somehow, she closed the video and frantically started checking the file folders on her laptop. Suggesting to watch something else, she noticed a video with numbers and English letters. To her misfortune, the second video was the same as the first, which made her feel even more desperate. Unintentionally, she felt a déjà vu as she continued to learn intimate details about the boys around her. Hanul thought about apologizing to the boy for bringing the wrong drive, but she froze upon noticing their gazes met. She didn't understand why he was looking at her like that, or when he had gotten so close, until he leaned in even closer. She quickly covered her lips and directly asked him what he was doing. He, somewhat nervously, answered her with another question, asking if this really wasn't the right moment for that. They both looked down uncomfortably when she asked him why he wanted to kiss her if they weren't even dating. Hanul had no relationship experience and didn't know if that was normal, or if he simply thought she was easy. With those sad thoughts, she quickly gathered her things and hurried out of the apartment. Sung-yun tried to stop her on the way, but she wasn't responding. So he took her hand and asked her if he had scared her. He tried to explain that nowadays close physical contact, before starting a relationship, is a common thing. She couldn't understand what he meant when he mentioned that people should make sure they are compatible before starting to date. The boy noticed that she was confused and told her it was just a kiss, that she wouldn't die from it. They immediately started arguing loudly until they heard the sound of a slap behind them. Hanul and Sung-yun turned attentively, trying to understand what had happened. What was their surprise to see that the boy who had received the slap was none other than Yi Sunbae. He immediately smiled in a friendly manner upon seeing the familiar girl, even though his cheek was burning from the blow. In an instant, he was next to them and said he didn't expect to see her outside the university. Yi immediately asked him what he was doing there, but she was so surprised that she asked him the same question back. He almost answered, but immediately noticed that Sung-yun was still holding her hand. The boy smiled thoughtfully, sensing something weird was going on. Sung-yun, as if nothing was wrong, said he was talking to his girlfriend and that they should leave him alone. As soon as she annoyed him by asking why he was suddenly her boyfriend and tried to pull away, he only squeezed her hand tighter. In a threatening tone, he reminded her that they had started dating yesterday, making her think about how someone could change so quickly. Yi Sunbae noticed all the tension and separated their hands with his, trying to calm the situation. The boy immediately covered her with his back and said he didn't care what relationship they had, but that using physical force was not right. That intervention greatly angered Sung-jun, who said it was their business and that he had no right to interfere. Yi remained calm despite the boy's provocations and calmly replied that he was her Zunb. Furthermore, he insinuated that he shouldn't shout so loud, since quite a few students live in that area. As soon as he mentioned that rumors could start circulating, Zunjian laughed and said that rather they would talk about the slap he gave him. It seems Jihee's remark didn't affect him in the slightest, and he just shrugged with a smile. While plotting a plan in his head, waiting for the right moment, he pointed a finger at a nearby house and claimed that someone was watching them from the upper floors. Sun Yan checked everything around him and wanted to scold him for the joke, but there was no trace of them anymore. While the boy tried to recover, Hanul and Yi had already run quite far. Upon stopping, Yi smiled and said that with such noisy guys, that was the best tactic. After that, he focused on the girl and asked her how she felt, but she looked really bad. The girl, making a great effort, tried to hold back the urge to vomit and could barely say that she had very low resistance. He apologized for what he did and kindly offered to rub her back, but she clearly didn't want that. As soon as he got close, the smell of his cologne made her feel even worse, and she couldn't help but throw up. Hanul was dying of shame, not only for vomiting on a university zumbe, but on such a handsome and popular guy like him, knowing she couldn't walk around like that on the street. He reacted very calmly and proposed going to the dry cleaners. She looked at him when, after apologizing again, he told her that everything was fine and that she shouldn't worry. Unlike the girl, he didn't mind walking around shirtless at all, so he calmly asked her how she felt. Hanul was so shocked by how attractive his body looked that she couldn't help but blush. Shrinking, she said she felt terrible, especially because he was incredibly kind to her, like an angel. She felt ashamed that he had taken off his shirt because of her and might catch a cold, but he assured her again that nothing was wrong. Once again, the girl thought he was an angel when he told her the shirt would dry in just an hour and a half. She clearly couldn't believe he was so amused by this whole situation. And although she smiled, she thought he was angry with her now. Jae reassured her again when she knelt down and said she was willing to pay for the laundry, the moral damage, and everything else. The girl was crying, saying she felt uncomfortable and that she was willing to do anything for him to make up for her mistake. The boy was so surprised by her reaction to the situation that for a couple of seconds, he couldn't even say anything. In the end, he became interested in what she said about the right to a wish and decided to take advantage of that offer. Upon hearing this, she immediately screamed, saying she had vomited on an angel and that he only wanted one wish for that. Jackie leaned over the girl and told her to calm down, adding that he would ask for 3 wishes. Just as she had said, he also admitted that he had part of the blame, since he almost forced her to run with a heavy bag. Suddenly, the girl remembered that, besides the laptop, Kim Min-cheol's sweater was in her bag, which she could lend him. As soon as she handed him the sweater, a USB drive accidentally fell out of it, which was the cause of all the problems that day. At that moment, both were paralyzed with astonishment, since he had also been looking for that drive shortly before. Realizing that this could lead to another awkward situation, she frowned, cursing everything. All her hopes that he wouldn't notice anything vanished when he laughed, and said that she had taken the wrong drive by accident. The girl explained that she opened a video and turned it off right away while he tried on Min-cheol's sweater. The boy, as if nothing was wrong, said that now he was a little embarrassed that she had taken a drive full of risque content. Hanel replied saying that, besides that, there was also a classic movie, but she didn't mention that it was for adults. He, smiling, recalled her words about turning off the video immediately, and was surprised that she remembered everything so well. Because of what he said, she instantly got nervous, saying that there was a movie there that she saw when she was in high school. Unintentionally, she clarified that thanks to that movie she had a dream, which made him recognize her immediately. He held on to that phrase and wanted to know more about her dream, but she was too embarrassed to tell. It seems his words only encouraged Jae Zumbai even more, who started smiling suspiciously. She felt like thunder rumbled over her head upon hearing his brief sentence saying that this was her first wish. That day, Hanel understood that she should think carefully before speaking, because an angel can turn into a demon in an instant. She sincerely asked him not to laugh, and confessed to him that she had loved the kiss scene in that movie, and that she wanted something similar. The boy was very surprised to realize that she only had the innocent wish to kiss the person she loves like that. Meanwhile, Kim Min-cheol just arrived home to visit his mother. As soon as he took a step, an object flew towards him, accompanied by his mother's screams, calling him lazy and good for nothing. Kwon Hyun-suk reminded him that he should come home every weekend, and asked him where he had been all this time. Although he tried to justify himself, she hit him again, saying he hadn't shown up for 3 weeks. After several long hours helping around the house, he asked her if she really only waited for him for that. She said that was the least she could do after finding him a house, even if it was grandmother's, and it was empty. Then she pointed out a mountain of prepared snacks and demanded that he take them and give them to Hanel. Min-cheol was surprised that she cared so much about her friend instead of giving him something. He didn't have time to get an answer, because at that moment, they heard the announcement of the arrival of the long-awaited guest. It turned out to be Lee Hanel's mother, named Park Jun-seon, with whom his mother had kept in touch all these years. The kind woman immediately noticed Kim Min-cheol, who bowed and greeted her respectfully. She smiled upon noticing how well-mannered he was, and tried to reach his head. The boy leaned even further down, allowing her to pat his head, while his mother asked, surprised, about the bags he was carrying. She, smiling, remembered that they had planned a gathering, and that's why she had brought several snacks and some alcohol. They were both very surprised when she suddenly invited Min-cheol to join them. Pak Johnson, somewhat sadly, suggested he stay a little longer, but he lied on purpose, saying he was already in a hurry. Although the package was really heavy, he accepted it anyway to give it to Hanel. In the end, his mother asked him to take care of her daughter, and told him that she could rest easy because they were always together. He calmly accepted and bowed his head again so she could touch it. After a torturous hour on the bus, Minchul tried to stretch his neck, sore from the trip. He looked thoughtfully at the bags in his hands and couldn't help but wonder how he was going to give them to her. Minchul immediately assumed she was with her boyfriend and kept thinking of different options, thinking that she was the one who should handle it. He sent her a message saying she could pick up the bags at his house. Meanwhile, the girl was still next to Jahezumb, who had put her in an awkward situation. Although he promised not to laugh at her funny dream, he couldn't help but burst out laughing. That little confession amused him so much that he kept repeating it and laughing over and over again. She tried to reproach him, but he asked her to wait because he couldn't stop laughing just by looking at her face. In the end, he managed to calm down and even told her that her dream was adorable, adding that she looked like a schoolgirl. Unintentionally, he touched her shoulder and said that the person who stole her first kiss would have a great honor. Jackie was surprised when she told him that he was much more unpleasant than she thought when she saw him at the university. He laughed again and thought to himself that, just like that time at his house, his seduction tricks didn't work on Hanul. Luckily for her, the shirt finally looked decent, and they could leave the dry cleaners, saying he would return the sweater when he washed it. He asked for her number to contact her later. Yehi concluded that this way he could call her to return the sweater, and took out his phone. The boy was ready to say goodbye, but he stopped, and before leaving, he whispered that next time he promised to be much kinder. Hanul immediately demanded that he stop whispering in her ear, because it scared her, but he just burst out laughing. When left alone, the girl thoughtfully rubbed her ear, and she stopped when she felt her stomach rumbling, realizing that she had nothing prepared and hadn't eaten since lunch. She became happy upon seeing Minkal's message. A short time later, she finally arrived at the expected place and entered the house without hesitation, demanding her snacks from the door. The boy was so surprised to see her so late that he appeared before her in a rather awkward situation. The girl immediately rubbed her eyes hard upon seeing him naked. Janel demanded an explanation from him as to why he was walking around without clothes, as if he didn't have the right to shower in his own house. In the end, he decided to get straight to the point and told her to wait while he changed and gave her the snacks. She obediently obeyed and observed everything around her while waiting for her friend. A couple of minutes later, Minkal finally came down and opened the refrigerator while she asked him what was inside, saying that everything she liked most was there. He handed her a bag, watching how she rejoiced over the food. What was her surprise when, among the snacks, she suddenly found a bottle of whiskey. Minkal immediately concluded that his mom had mixed up the bags in a hurry, and that's why it was so heavy. He immediately stopped his friend and told her to return it, since they had mistakenly given her the wrong bag. A spark of excitement shone in her eyes when, smiling, she proposed trying just a little bit. The boy tried to convince her not to, but she said she would talk to her mom later and mentioned information from the internet about the taste. In the end, he accepted and said they would only have one glass, to which Janine teased him a little. After all the preparations, they finally sat down at the table and began to taste that drink unknown to them. The friends had no idea how their party would end after a few hours, but that remains to be seen. At first, Janel was not very impressed with the strong drink she had wanted to try so much. It only just occurred to them to check how strong the drink was, and at first they thought it was no more than 20 proof. They were very surprised when they read the label carefully and saw that it was 40 proof. Janel firmly decided that they should mix the drink with soda, and then they tasted it again. This time, they were finally satisfied with the pleasant taste of their drink. She immediately mentioned different cocktail options and heard his proposal to try. She immediately demanded that they give her pajamas. She warned that the belt of her shorts was too tight, and it squeezed everything, so she needed looser clothes, yes. Or yes. In the end, she didn't like the clothes he handed her with such ceremony at all. Seeing her in his clothes, he burst out laughing immediately and called her hobbit, although she was taller than average. Her annoyance instantly turned into acceptance when he told her that he had prepared more snacks while she changed. As she walked towards him, she couldn't help but think about how different the size of his clothes was compared to hers. Suddenly, the girl felt like her stomach was itching, and she thought they were parasites that had to be eliminated with alcohol. So, after a while, she was so drunk that she tried to convince Minkal that she was completely sober. For his part, he tried to convince her that she was completely drunk. Without realizing, he was talking to the wall. As soon as they realized that, they fell to the floor dying of laughter. Suddenly, Minkal gently touched her hair and asked her how things were going with that guy. To her surprise, she just calmly replied that she had no one, and that no one had confessed anything to her. A mischievous smile appeared on his face that Janel didn't miss. Suddenly, he said he already knew she wasn't capable of receiving a confession on the first day of meeting someone. The boy continued to tease her, saying that when they were in elementary school, everyone thought she was a boy. She immediately retorted his mockery and reminded him how in elementary school girls always put makeup on her because of her pretty face. They continued to exchange eloquent insults, without noticing how the distance between them was rapidly closing. Suddenly, when their faces were suspiciously close, unexpected thoughts began to arise in Hanel's mind. Before she could react, he kissed her on the lips, giving her no chance to do anything. Both were completely bewildered by what had just happened when they finally managed to separate. However, the very next instant, Minchul hugged her even tighter and kissed her passionately. Hanel knew that something not entirely right was happening between them, but she couldn't resist the strong desire. She couldn't understand why they were suddenly kissing, since she had always wanted her first kiss to be with someone she loved. That thought was interrupted by the unexpected sensation of his tongue. And then she felt that it was even better than she had imagined. She found it so pleasant that she was confused when he suddenly pulled away from her. To her surprise, he asked her without being able to control himself if her chest had always been that big. After his question, she just thoughtfully stretched the edge of her shirt and said it hadn't changed since high school. As soon as she did that, she suddenly noticed drops of blood trickling from Minchul's nose. She burst out laughing and asked him if his nose was really bleeding just from seeing her chest. Like a little boy, the girl tried to help him, telling him to tilt his head back so as not to stain himself too much with blood. He didn't even notice how he lost his balance and accidentally fell backwards, spreading his legs in front of her. She was quite embarrassed by how quickly Hanel leaned in to observe his body. Her hand slid uncontrollably under his shirt, as if that was what she had wanted all this time. Minchul, somewhat apologetic, said his abdomen was so soft because he wasn't tensing it, which only increased her interest more. She was surprised by how insistent she remained in exploring his body, and asked him to tense it for at least a minute. The boy's face turned red as a tomato when she, even more determined, demanded that he fulfill her request. Unable to bear it any longer, he took her hand and dragged her along, demanding that she stop. Sitting her next to him, Minchul suddenly said he wanted to touch her too, and his hand began to slide upwards. She immediately looked away and told him he shouldn't do that, because she felt uncomfortable when someone touched her. Minchul didn't even know what disconcerted him more, since after that innocent confession, she started groping him again. Unable to take it anymore, he held her with both hands and annoyedly asked her if she wasn't ashamed to touch him. She was surprised when he suddenly started tickling her as if wanting to teach her a lesson. The girl almost begged him to stop, but he kept tickling her while holding her hands above her head. In the end, she was so exhausted from the tickling that she loudly demanded that he stop. Minchul stopped and carefully examined her body, which was half naked due to the intense tickle session. He didn't stop observing her reaction and ran his hands over her body, thinking he was going crazy. However, he couldn't restrain himself and quickly leaned down to repeat the same movements with his mouth. Hanel felt a pleasant mix of tickling and pleasure and then asked him to lift his head when she noticed something strange. Apparently, Minchul was so overwhelmed by emotions that his nose started bleeding again. Seeing this, she asked him worriedly if it was due to exhaustion, or because he was so crazy about her breasts. The boy quickly wiped away the blood and shook his head, although he was still acting a bit slow. After saying that, he looked at her chest again and admitted that maybe she was right. Hanyul didn't understand why he just sat there when the blood could stain his clothes. Seeing that the blood was still flowing, she started licking it directly from his face. She immediately pulled away as soon as she felt the unpleasant taste of blood on her tongue. To her surprise, Minchul kissed her passionately again, not giving her time to think. After what he did, the girl pulled away again with disgust, saying that now her whole mouth was full of his blood. However, despite all her warnings, Minchul was so aroused that he didn't even think about those small details. Hanyul tried to stop him, but he didn't want to put an end to everything that had happened between them. Her face blushed even more when she felt his long fingers quickly slide under her shorts. The girl felt strange things because of what he was doing, but he didn't respond to any of her pleas to stop. It was enough for her to accidentally look down and notice her shorts for her face to light up again. She perfectly understood where all this was leading, and she couldn't believe it was going to happen with him. Apparently, Minchul himself was so absorbed in what was happening that he could barely think. But he still asked her what she was thinking about. Unintentionally, the girl started reviewing in her mind what had happened between them, highlighting how pleasant the kiss was. Once again, she concluded that he was much better than she had imagined, when thinking that she wanted to try something she had seen in a movie. Suddenly, he asked her if she had protection. Just at that moment, the girl's dream was abruptly interrupted, making her feel even more confused. Surprised, she grabbed her hair, as if checking if she was in reality or still dreaming. Hanyul was shocked to remember everything that had happened between them, which surprised her a lot because she was completely drunk. She believed she had drunk enough to forget everything. As soon as she heard a negative response, she quickly ran to her room to take the bed and sleep. The girl didn't understand how she would be able to look him in the eyes after everything that had happened between them in one night. She barely thought about where he would be now. Suddenly, the alarm rang, reminding her that it was time to go to class. Meanwhile, Kim Minchul had already arrived at the university, where they asked him why he wasn't answering calls. To everyone's surprise, he was so distracted by what happened the night before that he couldn't even answer their questions. The boy tried to find out from the other one the reason why he was behaving like this, but he only replied that he had been like this since the morning. He demanded that he stop being in the clouds and proposed that he go drink with them, so there would be other girls. He just mumbled thoughtfully that the problem was that they always bothered him, not that he wasn't. He tried to refuse, saying he had a part-time job until 7 in the evening, but they would meet right after his shift. The boy shone with joy when he finally agreed to go to their gathering for a while. Minchul heard them ask him to write it in the group chat, but he still couldn't recover. As he tried to concentrate again, the memory of everything they did yesterday came to mind. Just thinking about her, his face turned red as a tomato again, which surprised his friends even more. Meanwhile, the equally thoughtful Hanyul could finally breathe when the last class ended. Her behavior also surprised everyone, since she was accompanied by constant mood swings. She realized that everything was going wrong, because she couldn't stop thinking about yesterday, even in class, and how to fix it. Hanyul was so desperate that she asked her classmate quite aggressively why she was laughing so much. They immediately offered her to look too, when she said she wasn't in the mood at all. Her classmate showed her her phone screen, where a very popular new adult comic was visible. She paused to think when the other told her she highly recommended it, if she didn't mind the adult scenes. That same night, Minchul finally went to the event, where as always the girls tried to talk to him. They did everything to get close, and get even a minimal chance to get his attention. However, he clearly wasn't interested in anything that was happening. So he answered coldly to every proposal. One of the girls suddenly said that the beer had run out, and that they should have bought much more. Realizing that it was her chance to escape, she immediately got up and said she would go buy it alone. Before leaving, she checked the chat with Hannel again, and wondered why she never messaged him. Meanwhile, Hannel was so hooked reading a new webtoon that she couldn't peel herself away all day. She was dying to start the next chapter, but she ran out of cookies, which became a real problem. She ran to the store, but even there, she couldn't stop reading her risque comic. So, unintentionally, she ended up standing in front of the adult products shelf and froze. She wanted to walk past, but something wouldn't let her move or forget what she was seeing. Unintentionally, Hannel thought about what might have happened yesterday if any of them had won. Her head filled with ideas and fantasies about how things could have turned out. Suddenly, she realized that she wouldn't stop thinking about it, and that the comic was only fueling her fantasies. Her face flushed, when suddenly she was surprised, wishing to try all that. As soon as she thought about who she could experiment these things with, the image of Minkal appeared in her mind. Immediately, 1,000 ideas came to her that maybe he would also want to try everything. But with her, imagine her surprise when right at that moment, Kim Minkal entered the store. Obviously, that was the perfect excuse to talk, since in all that time, they hadn't even sent each other a message. Although the boy was super nervous and didn't know what to say, she was very happy inside to see him. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had bought exactly what they lacked the previous time. In the end, he mustered up the courage to bring up the topic, and she immediately lit up with happiness. To her misfortune, he said it was best to act like nothing had happened, because they got drunk and it was a mistake. She was surprised when she turned around and saw how much she got discouraged after hearing that. Minkal didn't understand what was wrong with her and became even more nervous because of her unexpected reaction. The girl felt great embarrassment, realizing that he hadn't even thought about doing anything like that with her. In the end, she gathered courage and told him to forget what happened. Besides warning him not to feel uncomfortable, she tried to give him friendly pats on the back and tell him that everything was fine now. But he didn't appreciate her gesture. Hannel, smiling, said those hits were to celebrate that they were friends again. And she called him delicate as soon as she commented that he had strong muscles in his back, and asked him if he played sports. He called her a little pig. They were very surprised when he, unintentionally, drew her close by the waist, and she immediately clung to his body. They immediately realized what had happened and jumped far away from each other. They knew they had to maintain distance and behave as usual, but their bodies reacted differently. Hannel tried to escape, saying that curfew at the dormitory would start soon. But she stumbled and almost fell. Minkal managed to catch her just in time and held her, preventing her from falling. However, that contact only made them more nervous, because everything around them seemed to bring them closer. They were so surprised by what had happened that they got chills and couldn't say a word. Unintentionally, the girl was surprised, thinking about how much she wanted to hug him tightly. Minchial couldn't believe what he heard when she asked him if she could stay with him that night. After that, they quickly went to his house, where he immediately laid her on the floor. It seemed that he was feeling such intense passion again that it became harder and harder for him to control himself. As best he could, the boy pulled away and commented sadly that his dormitory was upstairs. He took her hands and proposed that she hug his neck so he could carry her. Instantly, the girl was already in his arms and, in a matter of seconds, in his room. Hannel didn't even notice how quickly she was back in his bed. Minkal was just as confused and stood still, looking again at the girl's face. Apparently, not even he could believe that this was happening between them. And he understood that their 20-year friendship could break. Seeing his pensive gaze, she couldn't help but think it was a sign to undress. So she immediately unbuttoned her sweatshirt. Despite all her doubts and previous thoughts, he imitated her anyway and took off his shirt. The next instant, their bodies were close, which marked the beginning of a new stage in their relationship. Hannah immediately thought about how badly she had planned everything. Because sober, everything was much more complicated. Still, she liked his actions, which automatically led her to think she was a pervert. Minkal watched what the girl was doing the whole time, to make sure she really liked him. From time to time, he asked her if he was doing it right, which made her feel less discomfort. Unfortunately for Janelle, the first time was more painful than she thought. But Minkal was very attentive. The boy carefully dried her tears and tried to support her so as not to hurt her or ruin the moment. She tried to scold him for that, but she froze when he placed his hand on her back. Her reaction amused Minkal, and he couldn't help but ask her if she felt okay. Thanks to his correct actions, the girl stopped feeling pain and started noticing pleasant sensations in her belly. To her surprise, she didn't manage to enjoy those new sensations for long when he immediately pulled away. Minkal tried to justify himself by saying it was his first time, and that he had been restraining himself a lot before. Their gazes met again, and then the girl quickly proposed that they try to repeat what had happened. The girl was so tired of all their attempts that she suggested sleeping. And then he had a dream. Once they were chasing butterflies, and he couldn't catch her and fell. The girl immediately ran to her friend and asked him if he was okay. She was surprised when she told him that she had a secret she was ready to show him, and she held out her hand. The next morning, Minchul woke up on the floor, since the girl had taken up the whole bed. They both got ready and went to university, where Hannah met up with her friends. The girls walked past the basketball court and noticed that the tournament qualifiers had started. They started cheering for their acquaintances, since there were only 2 weeks left until the competition. One of the girls cheered for her friend Lee Johan, who immediately gave them the victory sign. After that, they got discouraged, because normally, the art faculty team doesn't get past the qualifying round. Hannah looked carefully ahead when they pointed out the court where the management faculty competed. And design. She immediately saw Minchul, who successfully scored a basket and added points for his team. His team completely crushed the opponent thanks to his excellent play. Apparently, Minchul himself was not particularly excited after the victory and looked around upon feeling Hannah's gaze. Despite what had happened between them that night, he decided to act like nothing happened. Hannah didn't pay much attention to his gesture and was surprised when he showed it to her. A while after the game, she was planning to leave, but heard the question of whether she planned to go to the art museum. She looked down and saw Kim Minchul, who proposed they go together. The girl hardly allowed him to get close and answered coldly to the questions she was already used to. As soon as he proposed they have dinner together, she couldn't help but think that he was still behaving as usual. Thinking about that, she got so distracted that she didn't even notice the cyclist coming straight towards them. Minchul barely managed to pull her towards him and looked surprised at how quickly the cyclist moved away. He tried to act like nothing happened, but it was very hard for Hannah, which made her feel even more uncomfortable. Meanwhile, her group continued to work hard on the assignment, even though the deadline was tomorrow. Minji kindly suggested her tired classmate rest a little, saying she couldn't go on anymore, and that she needed to sleep. She got up and grabbed her sleeping bag. She took a pillow settled right on the desk and asked to be woken up in 2 hours. Minji got up to get coffee with Hannah, but was surprised to see how bad she looked. Again and again, the girl rewrote her message on the advice site, wanting to share what had happened to her. She couldn't be calm because of how calm Minkal was, and she wanted to receive some advice from strangers. Hannah was so absorbed in her problem that she didn't even notice when Minji appeared behind her. She immediately jumped backwards, scared, but her friend had already read the message and understood everything. She clearly didn't want to share that with her friends and looked forward scared. When asked what it meant, in the end, she ended up telling everything that had happened between them, making Minji squeeze her glass tightly. Hannah tried to warn her about the spilled coffee, But she was so shocked that she didn't even realize it. The next instant, she furiously asked her if she had really done that with Minkal. The girl was shocked by the unexpected question and asked her to lower her voice. Blushing instantly, she nervously squeezed her sweatshirt and tried to cover her blushing face. Then she replied that yes, it was true. Finally, Minji calmed down and asked her why she hadn't said anything, and if they were dating now. As soon as she heard they weren't together, she immediately got angry at Kim Minchul for what he had done. She knew Hanul had wanted it too, but she was still annoyed with the boy and asked her why she was so worried. The girl added that she herself didn't know what she felt for him, because even if her heart beat faster upon seeing him, it was more like attraction. Minjis was surprised when her friend said she couldn't imagine being in a relationship with Minchul, and that just thinking about it made her disgusted. However, her friend reminded her how being in the store and thinking about an ideal partner, the first thing that came to her mind was him. Hanul agreed and concluded that it was because he would never hurt her. Under no circumstances. Minji froze when her friend added that he was now behaving as usual, as if nothing had happened. The girl reminded her of her words that it was nothing special, and asked her if that was really the case. After thinking for a bit, she suggested that she do what she told her to find out his true feelings. Apparently, the girls were so engrossed in the conversation that they forgot to wake up their classmate, who had fallen asleep in the classroom. Meanwhile, Hanul was already trying to contact her friend and proposed stopping by to have lunch together. She squeezed the sandwich in her hand, surprised when he told her there was no need for her to come, and that he would come when he finished. Although she was quite puzzled by his abrupt answer, she decided to move forward with her plan. In the end, he intrigued her so much that she couldn't help but go, although she had to wait a while. Upon seeing the students leave the classroom, she followed him and was surprised by how large their classrooms were. She barely had time to organize her thoughts when one of Minkal's classmates immediately pointed her out. The girl was stunned when, after the shout that it was Hanul, all eyes turned towards her. They immediately surrounded her and started commenting on how pretty she was, and asking if it was really her. Minshul didn't understand what was happening, and tried to find out why so many people had gathered. After a couple of long seconds, she finally saw Hanul, surrounded by the students Minkal studied with. She saw how difficult it was for her to withstand that pressure, and demanded that everyone move aside. The boy quickly took her hand and pulled her out of the crowd, growling angrily at those surrounding them. An acquaintance of his tried to explain to him that he had always kept her a secret. That's why everyone was so curious. They finally managed to get out of the crowd. And then he told her that was why he had asked her not to come. He looked at her disappointed upon seeing how much a simple walk cost her. She dropped onto the bench as best she could, and heard again that she should exercise if she got tired so quickly. As a response, the girl just rested her head on his arm, saying she didn't feel well. At that moment, she unintentionally remembered Minji's words about what she should do to understand her true feelings. The advice was to get close to him at the right moment. And that's how he noticed that her ears were red. The girl tried to look closely at his face, but she was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Yihi Sunbi behind her. She immediately lunged at him with complaints, without realizing that, reflexively, she hit Minkal hard. It seems the boy enjoyed the situation, and shamelessly asked her who the guy next to her was. Jahai's appearance greatly angered Minkal, which shows that a conflict between two popular guys is looming. A day before all this, something happened to Jahai Zumbai that made him remember Hanul. He finally met the girl, who not long ago had slapped him in front of everyone. Before leaving for the station, she shyly told him that she had liked that whole day, and that she was willing to forgive him this time. Jahai was ready to say goodbye at that moment, but she surprised him by asking for a farewell kiss. Despite the simplicity of the request, he froze for a moment, and suddenly remembered Hanul's embarrassed face at the laundry. Reviewing that whole situation again, and her innocent wish, which he had mocked. He couldn't hold back his laughter. He laughed so much that he unintentionally splashed his friend's face, to whom he immediately apologized. She immediately went after him with blows and insulted him with every bad word. But he didn't care much about her anger. That's how the accidental memory of Hanal led him to think about visiting her. Right now, he was in front of the guys, holding in his hand a bag with the sweater he picked up at the laundry. The girl decided to fix the situation and introduced them, saying that Minkal was her childhood friend. She was surprised that in all that time, they hadn't greeted each other even once, and that a super tense atmosphere reigned between them. Holding back Minkal, she directly asked Jihi with what intention she had come to see her. The boy took his time to answer and looked away thoughtfully, while a mischievous smile formed on his face. In the end, he pretended his friend wasn't there and asked if something really had to happen for them to meet. What caught his attention the most was that his charms didn't work on her. And so, even now, she replied yes, deciding to play the funny guy. He said he came to return the sweater, and that he was just about to call her. But suddenly he saw them. Minkal thoughtfully looked at the contents of the bag and saw her sweater, after which Jehai burst out laughing and apologized. He also explained that he had no other choice, because Hanal undressed him in the middle of the street, and he had to put on his. The boy's declaration affected her greatly. Something noticeable in her gaze, despite her trying to explain the situation. Jehai left, leaving an indelible impression and forcing her to justify herself. As if nothing happened, she said she had to go to class, and although she tried to stop him, it was in vain. So the childhood friends were left alone, feeling a mix of emotions because of that guy. After recovering from that conversation, Minkal asked her why she had come, and found out that she wanted to have lunch together. However, in his mind, he reproached the excuse, because in reality, she had only gone to brush against him by chance. He immediately started thinking about what they could eat, while she kept thinking that she hadn't even seen his face. The boy turned around surprised, not understanding why she was silent. But Hanal was already plotting a new plan. She didn't have time to ask him what he thought, because she strangely touched his face with her finger. That gesture was so forced and out of place that they both unintentionally froze. At that moment, she felt how inappropriate it was to touch him, and realized she had messed up. Minkal was also not very happy with what he did, and directly asked her what she was doing. She clearly didn't expect that reaction, and thought he would start screaming, as usually happened between them. But he remained suspiciously quiet. Hanal froze, frantically thinking why he had such a confused expression on his face. Because of all those ideas spinning in her head, her heart started beating faster, and she remembered what Minji had told her about maybe him liking her. Her friend's assumption caused her such indignation that she unintentionally got up abruptly, trying to convince herself that it was impossible. Suddenly, she blurted out that he was a real idiot. Determined to change the subject, she immediately asked him if he was sleeping well, and started talking about her classes. She was so nervous that she couldn't control this torrent of meaningless words. Minkal was so surprised by her intensity and that unexpected verbal attack that he could only advise her not to worry. It seems that such simple advice only confused her more and created a new reason for a tense silence. In the end, as always, everything ended in a fight, which was already typical in their relationship. She tried to make him let go by saying people might think they were a couple. But that was unthinkable. Instantly, he demanded that she let go first. But that only provoked another argument. They agreed to let go when counting to 3. But it didn't work out as they expected. Even after that, neither let the other go, which only made him angrier. Finally, Hanal managed to release his hair and pushed him away from her. After a brief silence, she looked down and suggested they not see each other for a while. Minkal was very surprised by her suggestion. And then she said that, although she had started everything, she was surprised that he didn't say anything. He hesitated a little, but still asked her why she was so calm after everything that had happened between them. Hanel added that, after what happened yesterday, it was unlikely they would start dating, and that she preferred to remain friends. However, even though she no longer had hopes for a relationship, she admitted in a low voice that she now felt very uncomfortable around him. It was very hard for her to say those words that showed everything she felt inside. And she closed her eyes tightly. Apparently, Minkolt shared her mixed feelings. But he didn't know how to clear up that misunderstanding. In the end, he got up and remained silent, saying that he understood her and that the best thing was to leave. Hanel shuddered to see him leave, because all her worries remained unresolved. She tried to convince herself that it would be better if they kept their distance, but she still felt bad. With those thoughts, she sadly answered her mother's call, who immediately thought she was sick. She was surprised when her mom reminded her that exactly tomorrow was the day she had to go home. Her visit was mandatory because the next day they celebrated the Autumn Harvest Festival, which is spent with family. She froze when her mother asked her to go with Minkal tomorrow, without knowing how things stood between them. At that moment, she realized that Minkal was also going home, and they might run into each other. The boy also turned around when his mother demanded in the same way that he be home the next day. Despite all the doubts, in the end they would end up together on the bus. Shortly before that, she couldn't accept the idea of traveling together after everything that happened. And she opened the app. She hoped they could take different buses, and was happy to see that there were still some seats left. Hanel thought that, even if they traveled on the same bus, they could sit in different places. However, she couldn't believe what she saw when she noticed that the few remaining seats were together. And that's how they ended up sitting next to each other, which only made the situation tenser. Hanel felt his gaze and stood still, not knowing how to get out of that mess. Minkal was also confused by the situation, but still decided to try to start a conversation. She looked at him cautiously when he said he was going to clarify a detail that, apparently, she had forgotten. He reminded her how, after their unexpected and passionate encounter, she told him she would kill him if he told anything about it. For that very reason, he gathered all his willpower and pretended that nothing had happened. When he commented that acting like this helped them not feel uncomfortable, she apologized to him, burning with shame. He noticed how much she broke down after his words, and told her that he didn't want to feel uncomfortable around her either. After many hours, they finally arrived at their hometown, where Janel happily greeted his mother. The girl felt the same emotion upon seeing her beloved aunt, whom she adored with all her heart. It was normal for Minkal's mother to pay all her attention, not to her son, but to her friend. Minkal tried to find out where the other relatives were, and then they told him they were very busy. Instantly, Hanel ran to hug her mother, telling her how much she had missed her during that time. She was surprised when her mom suddenly asked her how they felt after drinking that day, knowing what had happened between them after that bottle of alcohol. Both could not hide their nervousness. Immediately, the girl started explaining that they only tried a little bit, and they didn't continue because it was too bitter. Their conversation was interrupted by Minkal's mother, who appeared and proposed they eat first, and asked for help in the kitchen. Finally, they sat at the table, where there was already a bunch of prepared dishes. Hanel loved her aunt's food so much that she couldn't contain her joy upon seeing so much variety of delicacies. However, it was very hard for her to pretend that nothing had happened, so the food seemed tasteless to her. She knew they would have to spend the whole day together, and she decided to simply act as if nothing had happened between them. Immediately, the girl thought she could leave and be alone if she pretended to have indigestion. She started eating large amounts of food quickly, as if she came from a place where she was starving. In the end, her stomach turned out to be so resistant to so much food that she didn't achieve the result she wanted. Hanel struggled to devise a new plan to escape, while Minchal helped his mother with dessert. While cutting fruit together, Hanel's mother decided to ask her if she liked cartoons from a certain company. The girl lit up saying that just yesterday, a new one came out. And then the mother told her she had a gift certificate for the cinema. She added that she didn't really like those things, and that it was better if she went with Minchul, while she and his mother went to a cafe. Both froze, realizing it wasn't the best idea, considering how complicated their situation was. The woman didn't know what kind of relationship they had. And smiling, she said it was better if they went together. As always, Hanel tried to fix the situation, trying to go to the cafe with them instead of going to the cinema. However, the temptation to watch the new cartoon was stronger. And in the end, she went to the cinema with her friend. The boy went for popcorn, while she thought out loud, sadly, if she was really a person dominated by her emotions. The long-awaited moment for the movie to start finally arrived, and the girl doubted if she could concentrate. Despite her initial fears, the cartoon managed to capture all her attention and evoked many emotions in her. At first, Minchul watched everything skeptically, but he ended up crying, although he clearly didn't want it to show. That cartoon impacted Hanel so much that tears ran down her face nonstop. She looked angrily at her friend when he told her he was already 20 years old, and still cried over cartoons, even though he tried to deny it. His eyes were just as teary as hers. They kept arguing until Hanel, by chance, saw a photo booth, remembering that it had been a long time since they took photos like that. She pulled him and said he surely wouldn't mind taking one. In the end, he agreed and stood next to her while the girl happily took the pictures. It's no wonder they even fought there. So the photos perfectly reflected their relationship. Upon receiving the photos, Hanel excitedly proposed they go play at the arcade machines. Mingkal couldn't refuse that proposal, since games used to be their main pastime together. In the end, they played until night, and had so much fun that the girl even had time to fight with some students. She looked surprised at the dark afternoon sky, and thought about how quickly autumn had arrived in her city, noticing that even though it wasn't hot, she still felt like having a beer. To which Mincho agreed. As soon as they mentioned alcohol, they immediately remembered the recent consequences of drinking, agreeing that they would surely freeze if they drank. They hurried to walk home. What a surprise the girl got when she heard an acquaintance call her name. They immediately turned around and saw that guy who seemed suspiciously familiar. He also looked at them carefully and pointed his finger as if he had just remembered where he had seen them. The guy and the girl hesitated a bit, but in the end, they recognized in him their former classmate. He was the same guy who made them think they could see something more in each other. Finally, they decided to talk, and they went to a restaurant where he commented that they were still the best of friends. At first, Minkal distrusted his comment, but Hanel decided to continue the conversation. They concluded that they hadn't seen each other since they finished high school 4 years ago. While talking, the girl started cutting the food into pieces to make it easier, but Minkal took the plate away to help her. Minkal froze when his former classmate asked them if they had really shaved their heads and lost their parts. It seems Janel didn't understand that he was referring to that conversation where they strongly denied falling in love with each other. She froze when he remembered the promise to shave their heads and rip off their parts if they fell in love. Apparently, that memory surprised her so much that she couldn't hide her embarrassment and astonishment. The guy couldn't stop coughing, but his friend just pointed her finger at him and asked him why he thought she was in love with him. Remembering that at that moment, she decided to change her promise. She confessed embarrassedly that she had promised to remain single forever. Immediately, they began to deny what he said about there definitely being romantic chemistry between them two. The girl froze in surprise when the boy added that he forgot to bring alcohol and proposed they have a drink. Hanel knew well what alcohol did to her and invented an excuse saying she didn't like the taste. He immediately replied that this restaurant had a great variety of fruit beers, known for their sweet taste. She had never tried that type of alcohol before, so the proposal became more and more tempting. Minchul tried to stop her, but he restrained himself, knowing that this would only provoke more suspicion and comments about their relationship. In the end, she started enjoying the drink and didn't even realize she was already finishing her third glass. She loudly commented how delicious and sweet it was, which only made Minchul even more irritated. Finally, they managed to relax and started talking about the things that happened to them during school. So unintentionally, they remembered how they played jump rope and got into the fountain, for which they were scolded afterwards. As soon as she mentioned the jump rope game, she remembered seeing other people's blood on her hands when they finished. With those thoughts, the girl got up and ordered them not to tell fun stories without her while she went to the bathroom. While she was gone, the boy asked Minchul if the sports competition season had started at his university yet. He was surprised when he guessed he studied at the Faculty of Sports. The boy was astonished when he explained that he studied administration. Although he loved sports in school, Minchul seriously replied that he stopped training since the first year of high school. He filled his glass and said that he didn't know that, because they attended different high schools. He proposed a toast, adding that it was nothing strange, since he realized that wasn't his thing. The boy looked at him surprised, because before everyone had high expectations of him and called him a star. In one gulp, Minchul emptied his glass. He grimaced and called soju garbage. It seems the alcohol relieved the tension between them so much that they decided to go to karaoke, which Han Yul loved. Lee Han Yul proudly presented them a new song performed by her, which made them think that nothing had changed. The guys started talking about how they grew up listening to the music their mothers liked. Very different from current songs. Apparently, Hanel didn't care at all what songs she sang, and that allowed her to enjoy the moment. A radiant smile lit up her face, making that moment even more special. She sang that simple song with such passion that the boys in front of her couldn't help but laugh. A classmate laughed, saying her voice sounded like scraping glass with metal. Although Minchul agreed with that comment, his gaze showed true admiration. It seems that at that moment the boy realized that, despite all his excuses, they actually felt something for each other. Hanel finished so tired of singing that song that she didn't even notice she hadn't scored a single point. The girl headed for the exit, saying she was going to buy something refreshing from the machine, and asked if they wanted anything. Minchul immediately noticed she had forgotten her jacket. Even though it was cold outside, his friend assumed she got up to sing, but he immediately went after Hanel. A couple of minutes later, he came out and, to his surprise, he found his friend outside. At first, she was going to go to the machines, but she changed her mind and was already sitting outside eating ice cream. She justified herself by saying she suddenly felt like eating ice cream and related it to the alcohol she had drunk. Without responding to her excuses, he carefully put the jacket on her, as if he were her mother, saying that after eating ice cream, she could catch a cold in this weather. He also put his sweatshirt on her. Minchul completely zipped it up and thoughtfully asked her who was going to take care of her in that case. The girl was surprised to see flashes of concern for her in his attitude, despite how cold he seemed on the outside. At that moment, she felt an unknown impulse and quickly approached him, visibly surprising her friend. He was shocked by her sudden affectionate gesture and blushed, asking her what she was doing. Hanel felt how difficult it was for her to say the real reason, but she confessed that she simply felt like doing it. Minchul didn't even know how he should react to that desire, but still couldn't resist what he himself wanted. The very next instant, he took her sleeves with his hands and took her aside where they could finally kiss. It seems the conflict between them only increased their desire to kiss like before. Although Minchul was more sober than Hanel, he kissed her so passionately that he didn't even want to pull away. The girl was invaded by the same feelings, and the alcohol she had drunk earlier only intensified them. The next moment, he managed to separate his lips from hers, as if he finally understood everything that was happening between them. However, she didn't want to move away, so he tried to approach again abruptly. He had to stop the kiss when he felt the cold ice cream dripping down his fingers. The same one she was holding. Surprisingly, that only attracted Hannel's attention more. And her gaze immediately fixed on his fingers. She couldn't believe what she saw when she confidently took his hand and brought it to her mouth. Minchil froze upon feeling her lick the ice cream directly from his fingers. Without thinking about what she was doing, realizing what was happening, he covered his face with his hand and, amazed, asked her what she was doing. He directly asked her why she was doing it with her tongue. But she didn't care at all. The very next instant, she seemed to remember something and burst out laughing, saying he had a big hand. It seems Minkal understood the true meaning of her words, which only made him more nervous. She looked at him without understanding when he concluded that alcohol was definitely not for her. He said calmly that she drinks without thinking about the consequences, and that if she continues like this, it won't end well. She took a while to answer. She leaned her head on him and thoughtfully agreed, wondering out loud what was happening to her. The girl closed her eyes and mumbled unintelligibly that she really shouldn't fall in love with him. Minchul agreed with her and wanted to caress her head like always, but he retracted his hand at the last moment. After a while, they finally returned to their former classmate, who already thought they were lost. The boy apologized when the guy commented that he was already singing his 9th song in a row. The very next instant, he was surprised to see that Hannel wasn't with him. But he explained that she went to the bathroom to calm down. Minkal tried to blame the alcohol when the guy noticed his face was red. He clearly felt that the other suspected him and directly asked him why he was looking at him like that. The guy apologized if his question was silly and then asked him what he really thought of Hannel. He just tried to hide his feelings. He agreed that it was a silly question and said she was like family to him. He felt remorse inside, knowing that just a while ago he had passionately kissed her against the wall. The guy covered his face with his hand and suddenly mumbled that what they did was incest, as if forgetting he wasn't alone. He said that from the beginning they shouldn't have done anything, but that they fell into temptation again. His friend was so bewildered that he couldn't say a word, fearing interrupting that sudden confession. Carefully, he tried to reassure him, telling him there was nothing wrong with his feelings or wanting to be with her. To his surprise, he only replied sadly that the only thing he could do was respect her decision and act as she wished. That seemed incredible to someone who had known him since he was a self-confident boy, and somewhat problematic. He was annoyed by his friend's insecurity, so he shouted at him, demanding that he simply confess what he felt. He lowered his tone upon seeing how confused his friend was. It seems he completely broke down, saying how much he feared that she would move away from him. After a while, that moment of the night arrived when everyone knew it was time to go home. To everyone's surprise, Hannel got so drunk that she fell asleep in the bathroom. So Minkal had to carry her to her house. He said goodbye to the guy, wished him a safe return, and left in the opposite direction. He stood thoughtfully in the same spot, mulling over everything he had discovered that night with his old friends. He concluded that they clearly felt something for each other, but either they don't realize it or they hide it. Still, he also understood that everything could be much more complicated because they had always been friends. The next day, Hannel had to open her eyes due to the loud meows of her cat. She groaned tiredly, feeling her head throbbing from the hangover. She tried to convince her to get off her belly because she felt like she was going to throw up. But there was no way. A few minutes later, she managed to leave the room, where her mother greeted her with a smile. She took the glass of warm water she offered and asked her, exhausted, how she got home the night before. She was very surprised when they told her that Minkal carried her on his back because she had drunk too much. That news woke her up instantly, so she immediately grabbed her phone to text the boy. She told him what her mother had told her, and he asked her if she remembered anything from the night before. She pretended not to remember anything after singing one song. but he assured her that he hadn't done anything weird. She thanked him for taking her home, wished him happy holidays, and said they would see each other at the university. Upon putting the phone on the bed, she was surprised thinking that she actually remembered everything, including how they kissed again while drunk. She knew that incident had only complicated things between them even more. It puzzled her that, even though she allowed herself all those things, both in daily life and on social media, he continued to behave as usual. She felt distressed by all those thoughts about what she should do, and whether what they had now could really be called friendship. Apparently, Minchul shared her feelings, and he was also confused by what was happening between them. Upon finding photos of their childhood, he remembered that she had always been like that, and that as soon as something interested her, she immediately satisfied her curiosity. He was convinced that even now she was driven by simple curiosity, that desire to know more about the touches, and everything else. The boy realized, confused, that when everything calmed down, everything would go back to how it was, because he knew her better than anyone. He smiled sideways, imagining that in the end she would apologize clumsily and say that she didn't know what got into her at that moment. Minchul rubbed his head tiredly, feeling confused because he had feelings, but he didn't want to lose her. His face showed deep sadness, because it was harder and harder for him to pretend. The next day, Hanel went to university as if nothing had happened, where the usual crowd of students greeted her. Everyone was preparing for the next basketball tournament, and that's why Minji decided to comb the girl's hair. She also had time to comb Lee Jo-han's hair, who was a member of his faculty's basketball team. He calmly commented that they were really lucky lately, when the girls wished him victory. Recently, his faculty managed to pass the qualifiers for the first time and reach the final, which was a cause for joy. After a while, the girls arrived at the stands to fully enjoy the game. At first, they were shocked by the number of people in the stands, as if all the students were there. There were so many people that they even occupied spots on the floor, just to be able to watch the expected confrontation. Hanel No couldn't help but wonder if basketball tournaments had always been so popular, and asked who they would play against. They were frozen in surprise when they learned they were going to play against the administration faculty. Now they understood why there were so many people. The two most handsome guys in the university were playing, although there was a strong player on their team. Lee Jo-han thought that, even though they reached the final, they would surely lose. Jae-zum just smiled and asked if he planned to play dress like that, and said he had confused him with an idol. He turned thoughtfully and added that they would see which of the two would win. Also, he looked closely at Minchul when he heard he was good at basketball. He seemed to feel their gazes, and turned seriously when Jae said they had a chance to win. Meanwhile, the girls were already pessimistically thinking about the score, with which they would lose, and clearly had lost all desire to fight. Minji noticed that her friend hadn't said a word, and only stared ahead with tension. She immediately jumped when the girl asked her if she really couldn't decide which team to support. Hanel brought her arms crossed over her face again, and expressed her hope that everything would turn out well, and no one would get hurt. After a while, the game was in full swing, with Minchul showing his best level as always. He tried to score, but suddenly Jae-zum appeared in front of him, whom he didn't like at all. Minchul, completely serious, demanded that he move aside, which clearly amused the boy. Hearing how polite he was to him, he couldn't help but smile and told him to call him something else. Minchul looked at him tensely when he asked since when he had been friends with Hanel. Jae seemed to want to get his attention, and asked him to share what he knew about the girl after years of friendship. He didn't take his eyes off him, and asked him directly if he was really interested. His face took on an enigmatic expression. Then he smiled and said probably yes. To his surprise, after those words, Minchul seemed to get even angrier, and took the first step towards the basket. In the next instant, he took advantage of Jae-zum's distraction, and scored directly into the hoop. His movement was so precise and skillful that the boy couldn't look away. It was as if he had forgotten which team he was playing for. And surprised, noticed that he had scored a three-pointer. Minkal coldly concluded that, if he wanted to provoke him, he should think of something more original. He just nodded smiling and said that didn't work. And then he heard Johan say that he didn't expect much either. In the end, the video design faculty lost by 46 points, which discouraged everyone. The students were disappointed by the defeat, since, in addition, their women's dodgeball team did not pass the selection. All this time, Hanel did nothing but eat, surprising her friends, who thought nothing interested her more than food. Suddenly, they saw Jijizunbi, whom they immediately surrounded, since he rarely participated in events. Hanel suggested greeting him later, when he was free, and instead go to the pretzel stand. Meanwhile, Jeji looked at the ground tiredly, while other students kept talking to him. Something made him look up, and that's how he saw Hanel in the distance by chance. Everyone had fun watching her eat while walking, like a hamster, as if nothing else mattered to her. At that moment, Jeji immediately remembered Minkal's piercing gaze when they talked about his friend. A short time later, the girl surprised her friends even more by suggesting they go to a cafe after all the food she had already eaten. They were left thinking when Lee Johan suggested going back to watch the basketball game. Hanel didn't like the idea, because she would have to see Minkal again. What was her surprise when her friend Jesus called her to say that her friend had ended up at the police station. Shortly before that incident, Minkal ran into Yahizumbe by chance, who was sitting calmly. He, as always, greeted his rival, the one he had tried to provoke recently. Despite the boy's curt tone, Zumbi smiled after asking him if he was serious that time. Seeing that he didn't understand, he decided to ask him again if he was really interested in Hanel. At first, Yahai hesitated to answer, but in the end, he sarcastically replied that she was quite cute. Minkal froze when he was provocatively asked if that wasn't the reason why he liked her. The question caught him so off guard that at that moment, all possible answers were erased from his head. After a long few seconds, he finally grasped the meaning of the question and asked him to clarify what he meant. It seems Jehe achieved exactly the reaction he wanted to see, and he quickly said he was just thinking out loud. In the end, he left quickly and wished him luck in the next game, without letting him say a word. As if by fate, a companion distracted Minkal and proposed they go eat something while they had time. He saw how down his friend was and tried not to pay too much attention to him. Minkal was thoughtful when he heard that the decisive game would be against the physical education faculty. Finally, they found a shady corner where they could rest and eat something while they had free time. The boy added that, while he was looking for him everywhere, people were already betting on the possible winner. The opinions of the guys were divided, because on one hand, Minkal had good skills, but the rivals had a good reputation. However, Minkal himself thought that sports made no sense, and he saw no reason to make assumptions, since he was only interested in winning. His friend froze upon hearing the rivals' voices right behind the wall where they were sitting. He hesitated a bit upon hearing the others say they only cared about winning, but still supported Minkal. A large guy from the other team was sitting at the table and complained indignantly that they were being compared to that team of managers. His words sounded so intimidating that Minkal's classmate involuntarily slid down the wall. Meanwhile, the rivals kept talking about Minkal's skills, that he was truly very good at basketball. Sun Jun was also part of their team, and agreed that their main rival was just an amateur. Minkal's ears immediately perked up upon hearing a familiar voice he had heard somewhere before. He thought that, as always, they believed that just because they were tall they automatically played well. The big guy Sankal directly asked who that boy was, and why he was so popular, considering how he looked. Minkal's friend tried to convince him to go somewhere else, but it seemed even he was amused by everything he heard about himself. Meanwhile, the big guy kept criticizing the boy, saying that because of guys like him, They remained single and couldn't get a girlfriend. Sung Hyun froze when the third guy suddenly asked about that blind date he had recently. He smiled sideways, admitting that the girl he flirted with was really attractive. Min-kal froze when he was told that she was the same childhood friend of Kim Min-kal, whom they were just talking about. Upon hearing the conversation, his classmate commented that she was quite popular. So it wasn't strange that she was surrounded by people. He didn't manage to ask anything. When everyone was left gaping upon hearing the question of whether she really had such big breasts. At first, the big guy didn't understand what they were referring to. But another clarified that Hanel was famous for having an incredibly large bust. Min-kal stood still while they kept talking. That they looked huge, even with closed clothes. Sun-yun thoughtfully recounted how recently he invited her to his house with the excuse of doing homework together. He thought she was naive or foolish for accepting, but then she ran out, which angered him at first. And then he forgot about it. Min-chul stood up when they said she wasn't pretty enough to bother. And that besides, she seemed easy. His classmate realized something bad was coming when he saw how slowly he stood up, and in a threatening manner towards them. The boys were instantly surprised when they saw who was approaching. Sun-yun clearly didn't understand why they were so surprised, since he had his back to the hallway. He didn't have time to react when his t-shirt was suddenly grabbed by Min-kal's fist, who loomed over him like an evil spirit. Sun-yun tried to stop him, but he received a punch in the face, which caused everything that happened next. As soon as Hanel heard that, she ran immediately towards the police station. She couldn't imagine why he would have ended up at the police station, and thought someone had hit him. However, on the phone, they told her that Lim Seung-jun was also involved in the situation, with whom she had been on a blind date. The girl added that she found out from some administration faculty classmates that Seung-jun had talked a lot about her, knowing that Min-chul hit him because he harassed her. She flew to the police department as fast as possible and opened the door. Her friend, who was a little beaten up, was quite surprised to see the girl loudly bursting into the police station. As soon as she saw the small scratches and bruises on his face, she immediately took his head with concern. She scolded him so hard for not defending himself that the police officer couldn't help but call her attention. To her surprise, besides that, the police officer pointed in another direction, where someone was sitting whom she clearly didn't expect to see. Seung-yoon appeared in front of her, beaten, with his face so battered that not a single healthy spot remained. In an instant, Han-yul realized she had misunderstood everything and froze in place. After that, a long and tense silence settled in the room, which made Han-yul feel awful. She surprised everyone by asking the police officer if they could leave, since it had been a mutual fight, and they had already reconciled. Seung-kyun, indignant, immediately protested, saying he had been hit, and that there should be a punishment. As soon as he started saying he planned to sue, Han-yul raised her hand abruptly. The very next instant, she suddenly hit him on the back of the neck, making him bite his tongue. He was so bewildered by her unexpected reaction that he couldn't hide his surprise. It seems the girl didn't care about his astonished face, because another round of blows immediately followed. Seung-jaeon tried to ask for explanations, but she answered him that, if he had any conscience, he shouldn't even think about talking about it. The boy jumped when he heard that she already knew everything he had said about her. Hanel ordered him to listen carefully, and warned him that, if he went to trial, she would file a counterclaim for harassment against him. Seung-jaeon understood that his threats were not in vain, so he looked down at the floor without saying a word. She pulled Min-kal's t-shirt and scolded him because now he couldn't say anything, even though he had been spreading rumors before. A couple of minutes later, they were already on the street, where Hanel was carefully putting bandages on his wounds. Although Min-kal managed to defend his friend's honor, he still felt awful. She kept criticizing him for still not learning to control his explosive temper. To her surprise, the boy only asked if she was really bothered that they had simply left the police station. Hannah calmly replied that she would only consider suing if he had continued to make a scene. In the end, she concluded that she didn't want to get involved with him again, or even think about someone like him. The girl added that the lesson had been learned, and she was glad nothing had happened between them, and that she had already told him everything necessary. She criticized him because, despite everything they talked about, he could really get angry over such a trifle. Hannah demanded to know what they would do if rumors started, but he didn't want to hear anything about it. The girl couldn't believe he really didn't care what others thought. What was her surprise when he suddenly said that she was more important to him than all those people? Hannah was so taken aback by what he said that she couldn't utter a word. At that moment, the idea came to her mind of how unexpected it is to become someone whose life another person cannot imagine without them. She continued silently, looking at her childhood friend, feeling new feelings blossoming in her chest. Although she had always considered him part of her family, for some reason, right now, she felt something different for him for the first time. The girl understood that he was not really her relative, but among so many people in the world, she had chosen him. She was so confused by this dilemma that she didn't even notice how his hand suddenly reached out. Minkal noticed the strange state she was in and tried to find out why she had stayed so still. She was so surprised by the idea of those sudden feelings for the boy that she didn't even notice her face flushing. The next day, Hannah was still confused, wondering if she had really fallen in love with Kim Minkal. That idea seemed so impossible to her, and absurd that she just stared at herself, thinking that maybe she had only imagined it. But as soon as she remembered the expression on his face, when he told her how important she was to him, she blushed and accepted that it was true. All those feelings for her old friend were tearing her apart inside, so much so that she let out a groan and collapsed onto the bathroom floor. She couldn't understand how it happened that. Suddenly, she saw a man she had always considered almost a brother. On one hand, she liked thinking of Minchial that way, but on the other, she felt a little guilty for doing so. She got up determined, knowing she had to calm down. But then the idea of seducing him came to mind. She stood thoughtfully in front of the mirror, realizing that, if something had already happened between them, he surely liked her body. Minji, who suspected nothing, was startled by a loud noise coming from the bathroom where Hannah was. She ran immediately thinking something serious had happened, and found her friend in a rather strange situation. She was very surprised when she saw Hannah sitting on the floor, suddenly sobbing and asking for help. The main thing she asked was for her to help her choose the right clothes. So they ran out to a clothing store. Minji had good taste and determination, so she could combine different garments very successfully. Hannah was so impressed by her friend's sense of style that she couldn't hide her bright look of admiration. When looking at the price tags, she unintentionally thought that she had spent almost all her savings on just a couple of things. She immediately thought of looking for an extra job, while Minji asked her why she needed to go shopping. She didn't want to tell the real reason, so she invented an excuse, saying it would get cold soon, and she had to prepare her closet. It seemed her friend noticed she was lying, although she didn't know exactly why. Although she was sure it was because of Minkal. In the end, they finished shopping, and Annal started looking at her new look in the mirror. The new clothes seemed much bolder than her usual jeans, so she started doubting her choice. Thinking if her skirt wasn't too short, she decided to invite Minkal to eat together. But it was very hard for her to do so. She couldn't understand what was happening to her, considering that they used to have lunch together every day. And she never got this nervous. Finally, she managed to distract herself from all those thoughts when, suddenly, a call from Minkal's mom appeared on her phone screen. A short time later, she rushed to his house after receiving the invitation to have dinner together. She assumed that maybe it had been difficult for him to get there. But deep down, she was glad she didn't have to text him herself. The woman replied that she had business nearby, so she decided to stop by and see them, and leave them some snacks. Also, she complained about her son, who hadn't even bothered to answer the phone. as soon as she finished scolding Minkal for not answering her call. He arrived home, tired. He was so surprised to see Hanal at home with his mother that he couldn't say a word. The woman started scolding him for being so busy that he didn't even deign to answer the phone. Minkal moved forward with a frown to help her. But Hanal decided to ask him why he couldn't answer. To her surprise, he stood still beside her and told her that he would tell her the real reason for his business later. She froze when he leaned towards her ear and whispered that he would do it after his mother left. Hanal agreed, but she immediately got nervous feeling his face so close because he had leaned in so much. After a while, his mother said goodbye to them after finishing preparing all the promised snacks. The girl tried to convince her to stay a little longer, but she had plans to go to the cinema with her own mother. Before leaving, she added that she had left something interesting in the bedroom and suggested they go see what it was, saying that she found it while cleaning. She left them alone with their thoughts and closed the door upon leaving. Immediately, they went up to the room, where they saw a bunch of photos from when they were children, and they were together. Hanal was delighted with the number of photos together that she had already completely forgot, thinking that Minkal's grandmother might have kept those photos alive. She suggested he look at one she was holding. In that photo, they were in swimsuits, and she was crying because they had promised to take them to the sea. But in the end, they ended up in a valley. They also found a photo from a primary school trip when they were still in different classes. They even had a photo from the second semester of high school, where Minkal had much shorter hair. As soon as he found an unflattering photo of her, the girl felt instantly knocked out. She lay down thoughtfully on the bed, saying that it was strange that he remembered everything so well after so long. Unintentionally, she remembered Minji's friend's words, that she knew a lot about style because she was interested in it. With those thoughts, she suddenly looked at Minkal, who was smiling while looking at the photos together. It seems he felt her gaze just as she thought that. The more she looked at him, the more she felt she needed him. She hid her embarrassed face and wondered what the chances were that he thought of her the same way she thought of him. Hanal was so lost in her thoughts that she jumped when he asked her if anything hurt. She didn't answer because she immediately started thinking why he was looking at her like that, and if it had always been like that. Feeling that she could no longer hold back, suddenly she approached him and kissed him, clutching his t-shirt. She thought she had definitely gone crazy, because it was the first time they had kissed while sober, and that's why she couldn't see him clearly. Unintentionally, she felt the urge to see what his face looked like while they were kissing. To her surprise, for the first time she saw him blush so much when she kissed him. A silence grew between them, so tense that she also blushed upon realizing what she had just done. The next moment, she approached Minkal again and kissed him again, seeing that he did not object at all. They separated from time to look each other in the eyes, and then they kissed passionately. It seems both had wanted to kiss for a long time, but they hadn't dared to take that step, despite the wave of feelings flooding him. Minkal kept thinking about why she suddenly wanted to kiss him. That question bothered him so much that he managed to pull away a little and asked her not to rush. However, the girl did not want to stop and clung to him insistently, but he remained firm. On one hand, he was shocked by her insistence, which was hard to resist, but on the other hand, he wanted to understand. It showed that he was nervous when he asked her if she was really sure she wanted to do it. After that question, her eyes instantly shone, making it clear that she really desired it. Minshal was so surprised by her unexpected sincerity that he stood still, feeling a lot of emotions. Suddenly, he asked her if she was doing all this out of curiosity, or if there was some other reason. The boy looked down sadly when she thoughtfully said that his assumption was correct. Suddenly, Minkal took her hand and proposed that for today they just kiss. He explained that he didn't want there to be any awkwardness between them again. However, he never confessed to her that he didn't want them to grow distant. Apparently, Hanal didn't grasp his true intentions and smiled, thinking that he hadn't said he didn't want to do it. Minchal tensed up, realizing that he hadn't managed to express what he truly felt. He was shocked when she suddenly squeezed his hand and brought it to his chest. For her, his reaction was surprising, which made her blush and ask him directly if he really didn't like her. The boy looked surprisingly at the sad girl, but he couldn't sincerely tell her that he actually liked her a lot. After a while, they finally crossed the line and ended up in his room, where Hanal was already sitting between his legs. They undressed quickly and moved on to the main thing, which caused them many pleasant sensations. Minchul was so embarrassed by what he saw before him that he couldn't hide his nervousness and admiration. The girl was having some difficulties, and she realized that there was still a long way to go to achieve the result she wanted, which reminded her of a comparison. Hanal was surprised why this time everything was so complicated compared to the previous one, until Minchul mentioned a detail. Upon hearing that time he hadn't done the action completely, she immediately realized that she hadn't heard the characteristic sounds. Like in the movies. It seems that sudden realization impacted her so much that for a moment she thought she was dead. Minchul tried to help her relax and was a little surprised when she asked him to kiss her. Even so, her request only served to awaken completely new feelings inside the boy. In the end, he couldn't and didn't want to resist her desire, so he kissed her immediately. That kiss did help Hanal relax and experience new positive emotions during the process. Minchul shuddered when he felt that absolute pleasure caused by her actions. Although his mind was clouded by the new sensations, he couldn't stop worrying about Hanal's feelings. The last action was very hard for her, but finally she managed to relax and feel how the pain transformed into pleasure. In the end, they continued to enjoy this new level of contact for a long time, until they fell asleep together. After a while, the girl woke up and saw that she was alone in bed. She got up slowly, feeling a little disheveled after the previous night. Although she still hadn't fully recovered from sleep, she could perceive the smell of food floating in the air. That smell was what made her get up immediately and head to the kitchen, where Minchul was busy cooking. The boy looked at her calmly and asked her if she wanted ramen. Hanal, half asleep and such a food lover, couldn't resist such a tempting offer. A couple of minutes later, she had a steaming pot of freshly made ramen in front of her, with a delicious aroma. Minchul seemed much more awake than his friend and offered her a hair tie to tie up her hair. Hanal silently accepted the tie and immediately tied up her hair, showing that she was ready for the meal. Finally, they started having breakfast, but the girl lost control again when she saw how handsome her friend was. At that moment, she felt a slight dizziness from the sudden rush of admiration for the boy she liked. Still, she tried to remain calm and started eating noodles, thinking about what he felt for her. She decided to change the subject and asked him why he hadn't answered his mother's call, since he promised to tell her. He explained that the faculty president had scolded him for his basketball team's defeat and for ending up at the police station. Hanal was quite surprised to hear the reason and told him it was nonsense, which Minchul agreed with. Also, he pointed out a detail in her house and told her she should fix it. She was surprised when he told her that even if she didn't fix it, she would still have to save this month because he was working a lot. Minchul confessed that he was saving the money he earned, but he still didn't want to say what he was saving it for. Hanal immediately imitated him because she wanted to hear the answer, but she didn't get the reaction she expected. Also, conversations about work made her think again about looking for a part-time job. She remembered that Minchul's birthday was in December, and she wanted to save up to give him a good gift. Apparently, the idea excited her so much that she couldn't hide her joy about her new plans. Minchul looked at her thoughtfully, noticing how quickly the emotions changed on his friend's face, and asked her what it was due to. Hanal, with a meaningful smile, told him she was going to look for a part-time job, quite surprising the boy. She knew that if she suddenly confessed her feelings, he might be shocked. so she decided to start flirting little by little. That idea seemed great to her, because that way he would get used to it. And then she could give him the gift. Hannel decided not to leave it for later. And in just 1 week, she got her first job as an assistant in a cafe. Although she tried to be friendly, her new colleague was not at all happy with her and made it openly known to her. The girl approached her and observed her carefully, trying to remember where she had seen her before. That same night, when she stayed over at Minkal's house, she was resting peacefully in her bed. While he covered her with the blanket, he laughed silently upon seeing how funny the sound he made while sleeping was. And he carefully stroked her hair so as not to wake her. Looking down, he noticed her hand, on which she always wore a wristband covering a scar. That detail immediately changed his mood, making him thoughtful and sad, as if he knew something about the origin of that mark. With those thoughts and uncomfortable memories, he remained sitting by the bed until dawn, without daring to lie down next to her. That same night, Jahai Zumbare was busy with something else and, during breaks, he went out to get some fresh air. After taking another drag, he replied to his interlocutor that he was currently busy with his hobby. After saying that, he smiled and commented that it was time to return, without revealing what his hobby actually consisted of. Upon returning to the hotel, he added that a companion was waiting for him and asked them to send greetings to his mother. Despite the state this companion was in, his actions seemed calm and measured. As if nothing was wrong, he approached the bed and asked her how she was, as if he didn't see the tears falling. The girl flinched upon hearing the boy's voice, but apparently, those kinds of games gave him even more pleasure. At first, she spoke so tiredly and confusingly that he asked her to repeat. And then he heard the request to remove her mask again. As soon as he removed her mask, she threw him a tired look and annoyed. She imitated his question and annoyed. She replied that her face was a mess, to which he congratulated her for her patience. The girl felt the rope no longer held her and immediately hugged the boy, demanding that he reward her for her obedience. Jehi Sunbi couldn't refuse that request and kissed her immediately, squeezing her neck with his hand. He kissed her very few times, and only for something special, so now he took advantage and pulled away, biting her lip in the end. Both of them liked the game they had started. That's why he lifted her legs onto his shoulders and ordered her to relax. Despite everything she felt, she wasn't prepared for his rough movements and asked him to stop, but he just dried her tears. Jehai had uncommon tastes, and especially enjoyed seeing her in that state. After a while they finished and separated to take the shower they both wanted. The girl returned to bed and asked him what he was doing upon seeing him chatting with someone. Without thinking, she stuck her nose in his phone and saw that he was talking to someone named Hannel. Although the conversation was normal, even so, it bothered her that even after being together, he found time to reply to another girl. She complained about how often he talked to her and noticed how he suddenly pulled the phone away. Although they weren't a couple, she still asked him jealously if he already had a new conquest. Jackie replied as if nothing was wrong, saying no, that girl was just a university student. And besides, she was younger than him. He decided to change the subject and smiling, told her that her eyes were a little swollen from crying so much. Although she didn't like that trick, she still felt better for the gesture of concern. After that, she quickly got under the covers and told him not to pretend to care about her tearful face. Hearing that, if he really cared, he wouldn't have made her cry so much. The thoughtful one admitted that he did care about her tears. Saying that, he immediately remembered her tearful face when he had just returned to the hotel. Without realizing it, he imagined Hannel in her place, since he had been thinking about her a lot lately. His expression became unsettling when, calmly, he confessed that he even liked those tears. That's why she stared so intently at Hannel when she went to see her at work. The girl didn't understand why she was so upset and introduced herself, kindly saying that from that day on they would work together. It seems her sweet smile And polite tone didn't help her colleague to like her. Because she was thinking about something else. Her gaze became grim. When she finally understood that this was the girl the boy she liked was chatting with. Finally, she turned around and ordered her to ask if she didn't know something, since her knowledge seemed quite limited. Despite how rude she was, Hannah was fascinated by how beautiful and elegant she was, like a cat. However, it also intrigued her why she seemed so familiar. After a while, customers began to arrive little by little. And Hannah made mistakes one and again, for which they scolded her. Moreover, on one occasion, she almost burned in the oven a meal that only needed to be heated. The girl's first day of work was truly a disaster when she prepared an iced coffee that looked like poison. Apparently, her colleague ran out of patience and directly accused Hannah of being incompetent. Hannah lowered her gaze and sincerely admitted that it was her first part-time job and apologized for the mess. Although she was prejudiced against the girl, she still listened when she promised to learn everything as quickly as possible. Hannah was startled when she continued to criticize her, saying that they had hired her through an advertisement. As if by fate, she raised her gaze just as her face was in profile, and suddenly remembered something. She suddenly realized that her colleague was identical to the girl who slapped Jae Zunbi. After that, she shouted so loudly with excitement that it startled the other one with the noise. Apparently, the brunette was shocked to realize that she had recognized her as the girl who slapped Jae Zam. Finally, Hannah asked her with a smile if she was Jae's girlfriend, although the boy made it clear from the beginning that nothing would happen between them. She still liked that it seemed that way. It seems her question confused Hannah even more, because she didn't know all the details of their relationship. Immediately, she awkwardly asked if she had perhaps made a mistake, which startled the other one even more. It bothered her to admit that it wasn't so. So she started stammering, but Hannah thought they were in the flirting stage. The girl was discouraged, since they had moved on to something bolder a long time ago. But still, they weren't serious about anything. Hannah's eyes shone with sadness upon realizing that it was an unrequited love, in which her colleague was trapped. She felt such a strong empathy for the girl that she couldn't help but take her hand, understanding that they were in the same situation. With a spark in her eyes, she confidently assured her that everything would turn out well. Those words only left her interlocutor even more confused, who didn't understand why she was acting like this with such intensity. She couldn't understand why she was smiling as if nothing happened after all the time she had been bothering her. In the end, she walked away and ordered them to start working, just when an avalanche of customers arrived. After that wave of customers, they felt exhausted, as if all their energy had been squeezed out of them. Oni was surprised to see that Janelle was still full of energy, and remembered that she was only 20 years old. The girl decided to take advantage of the occasion and asked her why she had accepted that part-time job. Janelle timidly replied that she wanted to buy something, but she couldn't say the real reason out of embarrassment. She blushed instantly and confessed that there was a boy she liked, and she wanted to buy him a gift. The girl rolled her eyes and thought it was something innocent, deciding not to ruin that childlike purity. Janelle, somewhat embarrassed, clarified that they weren't dating yet when she heard that 20 is a good age to have a partner. Janelle rubbed her neck uncomfortably and said they had been friends since childhood, and that she had never thought about that before. She could finally say that only recently had she started seeing him as a man, which made Oni unable to contain her laughter. The girl froze when asked how she met Jae, since they attended different universities. She recounted that she once went to a party of some acquaintances, and that's where they met. From the beginning, he made it clear that he didn't want a relationship, but she still had hopes and feelings. That's how they became friends with benefits, which made her feel even more uncomfortable when comparing herself to Lee Hanyul. She stood up abruptly and said that it is much easier to date someone if they were friends first, and asked about her friendship. Hanyul immediately replied that they had been friends since they were born, which surprised the girl quite a bit. While cleaning the table, she commented that in her time, childhood friends were very rare, and that their case really impacted her. She immediately assumed that, due to having such a long friendship. On the contrary, it would be difficult for her to start a relationship. Seeing Janel's sad look, she clarified that in those cases, you never know in advance what might happen. She told him her own story with a childhood friend who lived next door, and with whom she always played. Wringing out the wet rag, she added that so much time has passed that she doesn't even know what he looks like now. That's how she explained the true meaning of her words to Janel. And just then, a noisy group of students entered the cafe. It turned out to be Janel's own friends, who came to support their friend. The girl was pleasantly surprised that her friends hadn't forgotten about her, and came to show her support and affection. She ran towards them, and then her friend asked her why she worked so far from the university. Her coworker immediately thought about how noisy they were, and approached to see them better. Janel, smiling, said she had only been working there for 2 weeks, and that they shouldn't expect the place to give them anything for free because they were her friends. They couldn't believe what they heard when the employee said that the manager allows inviting friends when they come. While Janel chose a cake for her friend, she started serving the other customers. A guy tried to flirt with her, thinking it would be original if he asked if they hadn't seen each other before. However, that kind of charm didn't work on her, and she immediately criticized him for that flirtation attempt. After being rejected, he left smiling to tell that he had been rejected, while she asked the last guy for his order. What was her surprise when he remained silent, staring intently at her face? She took it as an opportunity to joke, and asked him if he was also thinking of a pickup line. He immediately moved away and annoyed, said he was just looking at the menu. The girl's face flushed uncomfortably when he asked her, coldly, if she had an exaggerated sense of her own importance. Upon realizing that he had exposed her, she lowered her gaze to the monitor to register a strawberry smoothie. Upon hearing from Hanel that that guy with the ponytail was a good person, they still prepared the special order for them. The girl proudly handed them the tray, saying that she herself had prepared the strawberry smoothie. Everyone was surprised when Minji suddenly asked if she had received the invitation to the group chat. She explained that at the end of the school year, they planned to have an alumni reunion, something she, apparently, had no idea about. Hanel was so engrossed in her passions and work that she didn't even notice the invitation on her phone. Meanwhile, Minkal was at the university, and he turned when his friend spoke to him. He directly asked him if he really didn't talk to Hanel anymore, since they rarely saw them together. He replied calmly that she had gotten a part-time job at a cafe, and was very busy now, which he didn't particularly like. His friend noticed how he was nervously tapping his leg, and assumed he was worried about Hanel, as if he were her guardian. He immediately blurted out that she could damage some equipment at the cafe, break something or hurt herself. From the rush of thoughts, he was pulled out by the sound of the phone vibrating, a sign that a message had arrived. As soon as he picked up the phone, he immediately stumbled upon the group dedicated to the alumni reunion. His old acquaintance Kim Chuzin asked him if he would go to the reunion, since everyone wanted to see him. Meanwhile, they weren't the only ones who had heard about the event, and they had their own plans. A girl thoughtfully reviewed the profiles of her former classmates until, by chance, she stumbled upon Hanel, whom she had always envied. She had always envied their friendship, and she had her own plans for Minkal, whose photo she was eagerly looking at that moment. It seems that at that moment a new and twisted plan to separate them in the future occurred to her. The next day, Minkal went to the train station to go to the place Hanel had invited him to. The girl greeted her friend with shouts, since he didn't respond at all to her calm greeting. He was about to laugh at how ridiculous her appearance was, but she immediately told him that his reaction got on her nerves. After saying that, she stood insecurely, showing him her new look, the one she never wore out of shyness. She tried to change the subject and noticed that, as always, he had arrived much earlier than her, although she did arrive on time. In the end, Minkal turned calmly and started walking ahead, just as they heard the train approaching. Although Hanul followed him, she still felt confused, because it seemed he hadn't even noticed her new dress. She seemed disappointed by the lack of reaction, since she had chosen the outfit with great care, without knowing that he couldn't stop thinking about it. A couple of minutes later, they were already on the train, where the boy remained distant and kept his space. Apparently, Hanul had already forgotten the reason for her sadness and was mentally humming a tune while looking out the window. Minchial noticed she was thoughtful and also directed his gaze towards the window. Finally, he decided to break the awkward silence and asked her how her part-time job at the cafe was going. She immediately blushed when he asked her if she had broken anything during that time, and if everything was as good as she said. At that moment, the girl shrank and said she hadn't broken anything, although she didn't mention that she did burn a couple of dishes. Minkal paused when she told him that something had happened at the cafe recently and asked if she knew Johan. She, somewhat lost, said he was Christian, not a Taoist monk, as Minchial called him because of his gray clothes. The girl recounted that he had recently visited the cafe and immediately approached her colleague Mihainuna. At that moment, she still didn't know he was her childhood friend, the one who had been in love with her all these years. He looked at her attentively while she nervously thought about where he knew her real name from. Suddenly, as if a revelation struck him, she placed her hand on his forehead. Then she saw the scar on his eyebrow, the one he always hid with his bangs, and finally understood everything. Analyzing what she saw, she immediately recognized in him that same Johan she hadn't seen in years. Hanul observed everything attentively, since not even she knew what had happened between them. Meanwhile, Miggy started to notice how tall he had become over time, as if she still couldn't believe it was him. Apparently, Yogan was also very surprised and stood motionless, thinking about something. To the girl's surprise, he hugged her so tightly that she couldn't move under the pressure of his arms. She was so bewildered by that sudden display of affection that her face instantly flushed. Miggy tried to push him away with all her might and asked him to wait, but he paid no attention to her words. After that, Johan squeezed her even tighter, as if he were afraid of letting her go and losing her again, like in childhood. Her face turned even redder when he quietly mumbled that he had missed her a lot. Hanul, with shining eyes, told Minchal the story of the reunion of old friends. She kept asking him if he didn't find it incredible, but the boy didn't care at all what had happened. Hanul was talking about it so excitedly that only at the end did she notice a crowd entering the station. They invaded the train so quickly that the girl ended up stuck to her friend unintentionally. They were so close that neither of them noticed how much they had blushed. Hanul unintentionally remembered her friend's advice about physical contact, and she raised her head to see if he was okay with it. To her misfortune, Minchal's face showed no sign that he felt anything. She was discouraged, without knowing that all this time he was mentally reviewing a long text to distract himself. In the end, after a couple of long minutes, they finally reached the special place they planned to go to. The choice of location surprised Minchal, because before they always went to the classic Manguar cafes. Hanul didn't want to tell him the real reason, and just commented that she had heard the food there was delicious. In reality, there were small rooms called caves here, where she planned to get closer to the boy. She was convinced that when people are in a small space, a special atmosphere arises between them. However, she didn't suspect that tall Minchal simply wouldn't fit in that room due to his large size. In the end, they decided to hang out at the table, which greatly disappointed Hanul and made her think her plan had failed. Upon hearing a characteristic sound, the boy went to pick up the order and returned with a tray full of food that smelled incredible. The girl was so impressed by the amount of delicious food that, unintentionally, she dropped her spoon on the floor, and it rolled far away. Minchal grumbled, saying she almost threw it into the kitchen. but he still got up to pick it up. She apologized for that, but he calmly bent down and said he would change it for a new one. She was surprised when he moved away strangely and left silently towards another place, making sure she couldn't see him. He held his head and cursed himself mentally because she had forgotten to put on her shorts. And he saw her underwear. Meanwhile, Johan was hanging out at the cafe again, watching intently the person he liked. Although they were old friends, Mighai still felt tension because of the way he looked at her. Finally, she turned around annoyed and was about to scold him for that behavior. He turned around surprised when the girl told him that Hanel only worked on Fridays and Saturdays. But his surprise was even greater when he suddenly replied that he had gone only to see her. It seems Mihai didn't miss the chance to point out how brazen he had become by looking at her like that. Upon hearing him ask her for a little consideration, she asked him if he really liked her that much. To her surprise, he simply replied with complete calm that yes, that he really liked her. She blushed immediately. And then he noticed that he hadn't explained his behavior. At that moment, Joan tenderly took her hand, as if trying to express all the feelings he had for her. Mihai blushed even more from embarrassment when he told her again that he liked her, without hesitating for a second. Meanwhile, Hanel was already mentally savoring the food, while Minkal went away for a moment to change her spoon. She was quite surprised when he returned with a blanket and immediately handed it to her, saying it was cold. The boy was happy inside to see how naive she was when she thanked him for worrying about her. After a while, they finally finished the much-anticipated meal and moved on to reading a bunch of comics they had chosen earlier. Minkal discreetly observed her, watching how Hanel's emotions changed with every unexpected turn of the story. He was openly amused by how much she cared about the made-up characters. She knew she had to wash her face, since it was covered in tears. So she went to the bathroom. Already in the stall, the girl finally realized that she had forgotten to put on her shorts. And that led her to an idea. She understood that Minkal had left so quickly to get another spoon because he had accidentally seen her underwear under the table. A couple of minutes later, she came back as best she could, crawling slowly towards the sofa so as not to show her underwear again. When sitting at the table, she started thinking about the reason why he had brought her the blanket so she could cover herself. She couldn't figure out why he acted like that, and got nervous thinking about the possible reasons. Hanel decided to get his attention somehow, and touched his leg with hers, which clearly surprised him. He immediately asked her why she was doing that, but she didn't give him a clear answer. She kept arguing and bothering his leg until he decided to squeeze her fingers tightly. That affected Hanel so much that she trembled on the floor for a while, clutching her ankle. She looked at the boy with disgust and told him that, considering the size of his foot, that fight wasn't fair. Minkal didn't answer her complaint and continued reading the Manhwa calmly, without showing any emotion. In the end, he did look at Hanel when he felt her eyes on him relentlessly. It seems that a new battle was born between them at that moment, for which they continued to stare at each other. He asked her directly what was wrong this time, since he didn't understand the reason for her concern. But she just looked at him doubtfully. Despite her apparent calmness before, Minchul couldn't stand the prolonged gaze of the girl he liked. The boy desperately tried to understand why she was acting like this, but his heart started beating even stronger. Hanel noticed that he avoided her gaze, and at that moment, they both had the same thought. At that moment, it was as if they had made a discovery, thinking about the other's feelings. But they couldn't tell each other. Hanel was about to ask him that very important question, but the sound of the doorbell interrupted her abruptly, taking advantage of the opportunity. Minchul got up to pick up the new food they had ordered, since she had eaten the previous one. She agreed when he calmly told her that the food they had ordered before was not enough for her. A minute later, she had a tray full of equally appetizing food in front of her. Hanel carefully checked what was there and realized that all her favorite dishes were on the tray. Unintentionally, she thought that she had already gotten used to his care, because she had never paid attention to them before. All that time, she saw Kim Min-cheol's kindness as something normal, even though he always showed it. She understood that she shouldn't rush, because their situation was unusual, and she had to be careful not to scare him away. Hanyul came to the conclusion that, if something changed between them, their relationship could end quickly due to his character. With that idea, she decided to approach him slowly, step by step, so as not to scare him. Despite all the risks, she sincerely dreamed that their relationship would stop being just a friendship. After analyzing her plan well, she called out the distracted Kim Min-cheol loudly. When he reacted, she gave him a sincere smile, and almost childlike, and tugged on the sleeve of his sweater. She already had a new plan in her head to conquer him. So without hesitation, she proposed meeting up in the coming days. The next day, she went to the bookstore, happy to have received her first salary. As soon as she had the money, a lot of things she wanted to buy came to mind. But she tried to save up. While browsing the huge bookstore, she finally saw the much-desired book she needed for her studies. Despite Hanyul's height, it was still difficult for her to reach the book she wanted. She was very surprised when a masculine hand, large, easily reached the high shelf, truly saving Hanyul. She turned thoughtfully to get a better look at her savior's face. She was even more surprised to see that standing behind her was none other than Jae Zumbai, who greeted her with a mocking smile. She observed the boy as if nothing was wrong, until her gaze stopped on a small girl standing next to the tall boy. The little copy of Jae stared intently at her, and asked her directly why she was looking at him like that. Meanwhile, Min-cheol had just woken up in his room. Even though it was already night, he went blank as his mind began to review the last events of the previous day. The boy tried to shake off that strange feeling, and shook his head from side to side, thoughtfully, but it didn't work, so he turned onto his side, and wondered if it had all been just his imagination. Immediately, he started wondering if she really liked him. Although it was hard for him to believe, unintentionally, images of the two of them together appeared in his mind. Loving each other not just as friends, he started imagining how he would act if she were by his side as a partner, and not just as a friend. It was as if the boy were in a sweet dream, where everything was as he truly wanted, and where he was truly happy. To his misfortune, the sweet dream turned into a nightmare, and in front of him reappeared that Hanyul who had suffered because of him in the past. She seemed to have complete control over him, and directly asked him if he truly deserved to be with her after everything that happened. An unknown figure rose above him like a true ghost, reminding him of everything he had done to her. She said that he was only pretending to care and support her, but in reality, he only thought about how to lock her up and make her belong only to him. Min-cheol tried to answer, but the girl called him shameless without beating around the bush. It was as if she was taking him back to that moment when he broke her, giving her a promise he couldn't keep. A few seconds later, Min-cheol woke up as if coming out of a real nightmare that had tormented him all these years. Meanwhile, Hanyul didn't even suspect the reason for his worries, since she was busy with Jaehae's little sister. The girl looked nervously first at him, and then at the little girl, while they spoke calmly about books. In the end, he took the little girl in his arms, and confessed that she was not his sister, but the daughter of his older sister. Hanyul couldn't hide her excitement when little Hebben shyly greeted her. It seems Hebben didn't feel the same way, and abruptly pulled her hair. Jae immediately told her that you shouldn't pull strangers' hair, and tilted his head for her to do it to him. He mentioned that his sister is usually busy, and asks her to look after Gibbon, something he does quite well. The boy smiled at his niece when she tugged his shirt, demanding that she was hungry. Hanyul thought about her plans and contact, said she had to go do her things. She barely managed to say that she liked meeting them, and was about to say goodbye. The little girl grabbed her hood. Hanyul got very nervous when the little one suddenly suggested going to lunch with them. In the end, she accepted the invitation. and Yehai Zumbai awkwardly thanked her for that. He kindly hinted that she surely had other plans. But she reassured him by saying she was going to eat something anyway. Yehai smiled and said he was treating, and that they should eat a lot, just as the little girl shouted that her uncle would pay for lunch. Hearing that, Hannah looked at the menu thoughtfully, hesitating about what to order. What she liked most in the world was delicious food. Although that wasn't the best for Jay Zumbei's wallet. She felt uncomfortable for being so brazen. But he just laughed sincerely, seeing the amount of food she was willing to devour. He laughed so much that tears came out when she said she couldn't resist after receiving that proposal. During all that time, little Hee-won attentively observed her uncle's behavior, which led her to a very simple idea. In the end, they finally decided what to order, and sat down at the table, remaining still while they waited. Hanel looked at the girl with a smile when suddenly she spoke to her after a long silence. She couldn't believe what she heard when the girl directly asked her if she was her uncle's girlfriend. Apparently, this only amused Yehai more. So, as if nothing was wrong, he asked her what she was going to answer. Hanel stroked her head to calm her down, and told her that she was just his university friend. Surprised, the little girl asked her if you could really be friends, even if they weren't the same age. Hearing that yes, she asked Hanel how they became friends, which made her think. She herself had forgotten. So she asked Yehai for help, who reminded her that they met in a group during an event. He, smiling, commented that a lot had happened since then. When she said she felt like it had been a long time ago, the boy looked playfully out the window and realized that more than half a year had already passed. That conversation made them remember the start of the first semester, when they had to meet in the same classroom. Although it was the first event, there weren't that many first-year students in the classroom. One of the girls complained, saying that he, as always, was arriving late, when everyone noticed he wasn't there. As soon as they started talking about him, he appeared immediately and apologized for the delay, illuminating everyone with his characteristic smile. Hanel immediately noticed that peculiar boy, who always won everyone over with his beauty and charisma. Despite his impeccable appearance, he was quite messy and lived in constant chaos. He always had a tendency to arrive late, but he didn't pay much attention to it because he loved sleeping well. That day, his tardiness played a bad trick on him again, so he woke up certain that he would be late. The long sleep affected him so much that during the first few minutes after waking up, he felt completely stunned. Finally, he gathered strength and went to the bathroom where he could wash his face and shave. Apparently, not a trace of the usual smiles with which he always hid what he felt remained on his face. He looked at his expression seriously and raised the corners of his lips to try to recover his usual smile. After a while, he finally arrived at the classroom, where everyone was already waiting for him. Tired, he asked them to be understanding when they asked him if he used the watch, only for appearance and not to arrive on time. Looking at the classroom, he noticed many unknown students, including some first-year students. He introduced himself to them and once again dazzled them with his radiant smile and a courteous phrase. Everyone was so delighted with the kindness of the boy who had more experience than them that they couldn't hide the sparkle in their eyes. Janel was also surprised, thinking that he was so busy that's why they hadn't seen him before. Immediately, the thought of how handsome he was came to mind, and the hope that he wouldn't talk to her. The strict upperclassman finally explained the conditions of the task for the next student event. Everyone paid attention upon hearing that the prize was 300,000 won. And then they started choosing the video theme. Janel froze, feeling like nothing came to mind, while her classmate timidly suggested a popular challenge. She immediately criticized him for lack of creativity, and for the simple fact that someone who studies video design would come up with that idea. He was discouraged and had to accept when they told him that it was necessary to invent and create something original. Apparently, the words of the older female student affected him so much that he couldn't say a word, and he became sad. Haniel mentally judged her for being so rude. And she wanted to answer him, but they interrupted her before she could finish. To everyone's surprise, Jejizun burst out laughing and directly asked his female classmate when she had become so rude. He addressed the boy and told him not to worry about what she had said, since she was just taking out her frustration from the professor's scolding. She, annoyed, shook him and asked him if he had lied. But he, smiling, accused her of not having her own ideas. Observing this argument, Haniel thought seriously, until suddenly an idea occurred to her. In the end, she raised her hand and suddenly proposed they do a parody of a movie. The girl liked the idea of parodying a famous movie everyone knew. But now they had to decide which one. Jae attentively observed Haniel, who was very happy, while everyone continued to speak well of her idea. He immediately noticed how proud she was of herself, because it was literally visible on her face. Her face lit up with a calm smile, because unintentionally she thought about how funny she was. The next day, they finally approved Haniel's idea and started working on it in the studio. Upon arriving at the studio, the girl couldn't help but be surprised to see the professional camera they would work with. She got quite a scare when suddenly Jackie appeared beside her and asked her if she had ever recorded with one like it. He was amused by her reaction when she exclaimed that he had scared her and confessed that she had never used such a camera. He looked at her attentively when she enthusiastically accepted his proposal to teach her how to record. She ran onto the stage as soon as she heard all the first-year students being called. Jae continued to watch her from afar and concluded that she reminded him of someone. Meanwhile, that sarcastic upperclassman had already started working with Haniel. The girl, full of energy, followed all instructions, from holding the spotlight to moving the lights. He was behind the camera, trying to figure out who she reminded him of, and his friend noticed immediately. The boy was surprised by the sudden question, but she just pointed out that he kept looking at her. Another colleague suggested he focus on the recording, saying that Haniel was doing her job very well. He agreed with her, but he still kept observing the girl attentively. The day after the recording, he could finally relax and walk calmly through the hallways. Upon checking the team messages, saying that many would be late today, he thought that he himself had arrived on time. He cracked his neck and remembered that just yesterday, he had a bad feeling when they agreed to meet in the morning. Noticing there was no message from Janelle, he couldn't help but wonder if she would come, considering how responsible she seemed. For some reason, he was convinced that she wouldn't show up today, and he opened the door to the computer lab where they planned to meet. What was his surprise upon seeing that the girl was already there, eating a hamburger. For the first few seconds, he was so bewildered that he couldn't say a word. She explained that she had arrived a short while ago, and she didn't write anything because she decided to come early. Despite everything she was saying, the only thing that worried her was whether she could really eat all that food in one go. It took him several long seconds before he could organize his thoughts. He kept staring intently at Haniel until he finally noticed how much she resembled a hamster who loves to eat. Haniel had no idea of that sudden thought, so she was surprised to see him laughing nonstop. Jae tried to convince her that everything was fine, but he still couldn't stop laughing at that unexpected comparison. In the end, he managed to regain his composure and suggested they start since the others were running a bit late. That encounter was what led him to feel a sudden interest in the girl and to always seek her gaze. Now she was smiling, sincerely thanking him for remembering that very funny and pleasant story. He returned the smile when she thanked him for the food and told her that he also enjoyed remembering all that. After a while, they said goodbye, and each went their own way, wishing each other a good afternoon. After saying goodbye, Yehai continued to watch her in silence, watching her walk away. Without suspecting anything, he turned to his niece with his usual smile. When she suddenly called him, he couldn't hide his surprise when she, out of nowhere, asked him if he liked Janelle. He tried to joke by saying that he liked her as a person, and that was normal but the girl meant something else. His face filled with confusion when she told him that his gaze toward Janel was the same as his mother's when she looks at his father. Apparently, what he heard impacted him so much that for a couple of seconds he couldn't say anything coherent. In that special moment, it was as if he finally understood something important that would influence his future decisions and actions. Time continued to advance mercilessly, and Minchel's birthday was slowly approaching, marking the beginning of December. The boy was hanging out in his friend's room again, turning over another thought that wouldn't leave him in peace. He fell asleep for a while and woke up breathing heavily, as if trying to recover from another nightmare. Minchul had a headache and said they should have woken him up as soon as he fell asleep. His friend didn't miss the chance to tease him and asked him if he was perhaps planning to move into the dorm out of fear of ghosts at home. Upon hearing the doorbell, he remembered that an acquaintance had invited them for drinks because he had broken up with his girlfriend. So he remained still for a few seconds, wondering if he should accept his friend's invitation. Meanwhile, Hannel's friends had already gathered at the cafe, where she worked to talk about everyday things. Medium. The others immediately noticed Minji's scarf, a sign that winter had arrived. They gathered to talk about a group project and decide what locations they should choose and film for the project. One of the locations was an old house, but they had trouble finding the right place. Minji immediately suggested changing the house for something else, but that would cause the necessary atmosphere to be lost. Hannel listened attentively to the conversation, thinking about all the possible solutions to the problem. Her classmates immediately turned around when she suddenly said she had an idea. After that, she approached Mihai and asked her if she could leave for a moment to make a call. And she received permission. Johan looked at them worriedly, sensing that something strange was going on with his old friend's mood. After a while, Hannel returned and happily announced that her problem was already solved. She explained that Kim Minchul lives right in the old house and agreed to lend it to them for a day next week. Minji happily hugged her friend, while she recounted that he was going out for drinks with his friends and that they might even stay longer. She smiled proudly when her friends started praising both her and Kim Minchul. Her moment of triumph didn't last long, because her colleagues shouted at her, reminding her that they still had a lot of work to do. Hannel ran to her and apologized, as if not even noticing that something in her mood had changed. The girl's emotional comment visibly affected the customers, making them all feel guilty except Johan. His bad mood had to do with an emotional blow he had experienced the day before. He met Yahai Zumbai, thinking it was a normal date, but he suddenly proposed ending everything. Mighai really didn't understand what motivated his decision, and fidgeted in her seat while asking him. She immediately thought she had done something wrong, but he just calmly told her it wasn't about her, but about him. He found it hard to find the words, but he tried to explain that it was the first time something like this had happened to him, and he wasn't sure about anything. Her whole body froze when he suddenly confessed that there was someone who interested him, something that had never happened to him before. For some reason, her intuition told her it was Hannel, and she wasn't wrong. He scratched his head nonchalantly and said he had too many things on his mind, and that's why he couldn't think about anything else. Mihai remained silent when he added that he had decided to tell her in person because they had spent a long time together. The boy looked up when she suddenly asked what he planned to do now with his feelings for that girl. She asked him if he planned to date her, but he only replied that he hadn't thought about it yet. After those words, he suddenly looked away towards the window, as if he had grasped a new idea for himself. Jahai, who previously rejected any relationship, suddenly murmured that he wouldn't mind. The girl was so broken by her unrequited love that she could only ask quietly why everything had to be like this. He was surprised when she confused him, asking since when was one person enough for him. Inside, resentment consumed her. So she reminded him again that he had said he didn't want a partner. However, Jehai felt no guilt and as if nothing was wrong, replied that decisions can change. She couldn't believe what she heard when he asked her why she was angry, saying that they didn't owe each other anything. It was precisely for this reason that she felt a mix of betrayal and pain, and that's why she let Janel go home so as not to see her anymore. The girl noticed her colleague acting weird, but she only coldly replied that she should take her friends and leave. Although Janel didn't understand the true reason for that behavior, she did what she was told anyway and said goodbye. Before leaving, she asked him to call her if he needed anything, which made Mihai feel even worse. She tried to distract herself from her heavy thoughts by doing routine tasks in the cafe. It was almost closing time and, as always, she went out to take out the trash. She took a few steps towards the establishment, but the emptiness and pain she felt forced her to stop. Mihai couldn't hold back anymore, and she dropped to the floor, knowing no one was watching. And she could finally vent, mentally cursing everyone and everything around her, not understanding why the same thing always happened to her. As soon as she thought about how much she hated herself, someone gently covered her with his jacket. Johan was in front of her, who calmly pointed out that she was crying curled up again. She looked at him again with her big eyes full of tears, feeling like the whole world hated her. Miji unintentionally recalled how little Johan found her crying in a corner, and calmly asked her who had made her cry that time. That day, as always, she was coming back from school, not imagining that something bad could happen. Passing by another corner of the house, she stopped, hearing sad sobbing from someone. She approached slowly, trying not to scare the crying girl, and suddenly saw Mijanunu. Apparently, the girl didn't like that the boy found her again in such a weak moment and vulnerable. Now, after so many years, he saw her again heartbroken and eyes full of tears. Mijanunu tried to maintain dignity and somehow got up from the floor, protesting that he had scared her. Upon hearing his question about why he was there, Johan replied that he saw her with a sad face, and that worried him. The girl looked away, realizing that he was once again offering her his support right at the most difficult time. And unexpected. Even so, she didn't want to show weakness, and she handed him her sweatshirt, saying that she already had someone she liked. Mighai coldly added that he shouldn't waste time on her, but he only asked if she was crying because of that person. Johan didn't want to leave her alone with her thoughts, and told her he was a very good listener, and that they could get a drink together. Apparently, she didn't like the idea much, and immediately asked him to stop joking. She turned around annoyed and asked him why he thought she would want to tell him her problems. Mighai exaggeratedly raised her phone and said she had many friends besides him. However, despite all her defiant attitude, she ended up agreeing to get a drink with him and told him everything she felt. Johan was more sober and told her to eat something, because her stomach might hurt with so much alcohol. She blushed and ordered him not to get any ideas, that she was there with him only because her other friends were busy. After that, she immediately returned to talking about her situation and complained about how he could just end everything suddenly and forget about it. She hit the table with her fists and said that she had turned out nicely, hoping he would invite her to coffee for something special. Mighai exclaimed loudly that he had no right to do that just because he was handsome, and that besides, he had weird tastes. Johan felt confused, thinking that she really didn't see him as a man, since she spoke so freely about her personal life. After a brief silence, she suddenly asked him why she couldn't forget him if he was such a bad person. The girl fell silent sadly and quietly replied that he had been kind to her, although that was something completely normal. She always knew he didn't do it because he loved her, but she cared so much that, unintentionally, she started building illusions. Mighai thought that, if she kept clinging to their relationship, one day it could turn into something more. She didn't mention the appearance of Hanel between them, but even so, she suddenly confessed that she was envious of her. The girl added that you didn't even need to look closely to notice that everyone around her loved Hanel. She also mentioned Minchial, saying with certainty that he loved her too, for real. Miji was discouraged, saying that it bothered her how everything turned out well for her without much effort. Although that bothered her, she still spoke of her as a very good person who cared about others. She rested her head on her arms sadly, saying that she felt horrible for being jealous and hating a girl like that. It was enough for Johan to call her by name a couple of times for her to jump up and say she was going to eat something. She smiled and said that, although she had talked a lot, he used to listen to her complaints as a child and let her vent. She added that now she felt just as comfortable with him, since she could tell him such embarrassing things so easily. Johan pondered his own situation when she said she was treating, and ordered him to ask for whatever he wanted. At that moment, he realized that he wasn't really interested while she finished another bottle of soju. After a while, she was so drunk that she could barely talk, and started laughing. She leaned her head against the wall, and said that, in reality, she had never been anyone's priority. The girl swayed a little, and added that, for both her family and her friends and boyfriends, she had always been the second option. Johan approached and told her she was very drunk, and that they should go home. He told her in a lecturing tone that she shouldn't get so drunk, because she wouldn't even notice if someone took her away. Suddenly, the girl touched his nose and told him that everything was fine, because now she was with him. With a mischievous smile, she asserted that she knew he wouldn't touch her, and he agreed, saying that it was torture. Johan sat beside her, offered her to lean on him, and asked her to stop moving her head so much. She just said that he was very good, to which he replied that he was only like that with her. Suddenly, Miggy started talking about how she didn't want loneliness to control her life, and that motivated her to work on herself. She watched many videos about self-esteem. She worked on her mental state and filled herself with work. But even so, now she broke down crying again, confessing that she felt useless when she stayed home alone. Johan listened frustratedly to how difficult it was for her to be alone, and how she couldn't do anything about it. She cried bitterly, wishing that at least someone was by her side. But she seemed not to notice her old friend. He was still there, while she said that if she had someone by her side, she wouldn't feel so alone. Saying this, she unintentionally fell asleep on his shoulder, like a tired kitten. She didn't hear when he, thoughtfully, said he was willing to be a friend to her, boyfriend, and, if she wanted, family, considering how many years her feelings were rejected. Those words sounded sad, but still full of tenderness. He dreamed that, at least once, she would see him not just as a friend, but as a true partner worthy of her. In these days, they weren't the only ones who managed to express their feelings thanks to alcohol. Minkal's friend was surprised to see the state he was in at that moment. The boy got so drunk that he almost passed out, and he slumped tiredly onto the table. Kim Minkal blinked thoughtfully, wondering what had led him to drink so much that night. Meanwhile, at his house, the filming organized for a future university assignment was in full swing. After long hours of hard work, Johan finally pronounced the magic phrase, indicating they were finished. Although many hours of editing still awaited them, they were still super happy to have done the main part. The girl, somewhat sad, said that all that remained was to clean up, and they could go home. But still, she didn't lose optimism. They were very surprised when Hanul, exhausted, fell directly onto the carpet, without saying a word. Minji explained that the girl hadn't slept all night because she was doing assignments for other subjects before the semester ended. Hanul was conscious and felt her body shaking so much that she doubted she could make it to the dorm. As best she could, she got up and said tiredly that she would stay and sleep there, since Kim Minchil wouldn't be back until tomorrow, saying that she herself would clean everything up. She asked them to return the equipment and to call her in the morning so she wouldn't oversleep and be late for work. On the way home, the friends talked calmly about the possible end-of-semester celebration after Hanul's shift. Minji said that tomorrow they couldn't, because they had an alumni reunion they couldn't miss. Her friend was surprised, since it was too soon for such a reunion, and also right before the exams. Johan surprised them by saying that he would also be busy tomorrow because he had a date with someone. The girl immediately assumed it was with a girl and justified it by saying she always felt that way. Johan looked cautiously at his friend. When she demanded, he tell her the details of tomorrow's date. Because of this, he unintentionally remembered how not long ago he had Mijinuna beside him, drunk, who had fallen asleep in the bar. Upon waking up, she was surprised to see that there was something big behind her. And warm. She immediately jumped from the spot and looked at the boy, surprised to realize she was in his arms. It seems that made her so nervous that her heart almost jumped out of her chest. Although Johan remained as calm as ever, he told her without hesitation that she had drunk a lot and fell asleep, so he didn't know where to take her, and seeing that she was cold, he decided to give her warmth. Miji apologized and started taking off her sweatshirt, but he ordered her to put it back on so she wouldn't get cold. She tried to show that she wasn't cold at all, but an unexpected sneeze immediately betrayed her. Blowing her nose, she realized there was no point in arguing anymore and allowed him to put it back on. She lowered her gaze and told him that now he would be the one who would be cold. But he tried to convince her that he wasn't a cold person. He showed no shame when he suddenly brought his hands to her face and pointed out that they were warm. It seems Miji didn't understand that gesture well and moved his hands away, telling him not to try to be nice. The boy fell silent when she asserted that she knew that wasn't his personality. She paused thoughtfully when he suddenly asked her if she really didn't like how he behaved. The girl tried to say something else, but in the end, she sincerely admitted that she actually didn't like it. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly demanded that she thank him for being left on the street in the middle of the night because of him. A couple of hours later, Hannel finally managed to wake up after those long and precious hours of deep sleep, feeling all the aftereffects of a good rest. She reached for the phone without imagining that Minchial was there. Motionless, she was so surprised to see the boy, whom she didn't expect until the morning, that she jumped in place. Hannel immediately told him that he had scared her and reminded him that he had said he would sleep at his friend's house today. She tried to scold him for not letting her know, until she noticed a strong smell of alcohol. Minkal seemed absent while she touched his face, mentioning his clouded gaze, and that he wasn't himself. The boy decided to contradict her and hugged her tightly around the waist, resting his face on her chest. Hannel felt that, for some reason, she couldn't push him away and unintentionally thought about how much he must have drunk that night. It was the first time she had seen him so drunk and tried to make him react, but he wasn't responding. Worried, the girl asked him if he had truly forgotten the alumni meeting and how he planned to deal with the hangover. After those words, he could finally open his eyes and started looking at her in love. She was surprised when he suddenly said he liked her kindness and brought the girl's hand to his face. Like a faithful puppy, he pressed against her hand and rubbed his cheek while his face showed shame and a great state of intoxication. He gently squeezed her palm and suddenly directed his gaze towards her face, making their eyes meet instantly. For a second, a familiar idea appeared in his head, but he decided he didn't want to do something like that while she was so drunk, making the decision that it would only happen after starting a formal relationship. He called her and proposed sleeping together. What was his surprise when Minchial timidly asked her to sleep together that night. At first he had doubts, but he still suddenly accepted her request. Minchial's meeting today started with his friend's bitter tears, who was going through a painful breakup. The guys were so surprised by his down mood that they froze, without saying a word. It shocked them that, in just 10 minutes, he had already downed an entire bottle of alcohol completely alone. Although the girls always left him, this time he felt like he had lost his girlfriend at the same time. And his friend. Apparently, Minkal wasn't very interested in the details of his personal life, so he immediately started enjoying the food. The sad boy recounted that they had been friends since middle school and that he wished he could turn back time. That situation reminded him a little of what happened between Minkhal and Neil, so he remained thoughtful. The boy continued saying that for a long time they were friends, and they knew each other very well. But everything changed as soon as they became a couple. Min Chial was shocked when he added that even the way she looked at him was different, which affected him a lot. The guys were speechless when Min Chial suddenly asked if they couldn't go back to being friends, something that seemed impossible. His friend said that they had already gone too far to go back to how things were before. That opinion automatically led him to heavy thoughts, and dark ones, because what he feared most was that he and Janel would become strangers. Partly, that is exactly what made Minchial get drunk senseless. His friend asked him if he was okay, and what had led him to get so drunk, as if he had been dumped. Without answering anything, he raised his head thoughtfully, while the other boy went out to buy hangover medicine. After he left, he suddenly remembered that he had to go home, as if an instinct had suddenly arisen in him. He got home so fast that not even 5 minutes had passed since his friend left. The boy got so drunk that he ended up falling asleep for a good while next to the girl he liked. He got up as quietly as possible. He stood still and observed her sleeping face attentively. He was sure that she was sleeping, and that led him to suddenly be sincere, saying that he couldn't be far from her. Minchul added that's why it was better not to take risks or start anything that could jeopardize their relationship. Despite the serious tone of his words, he couldn't help but laugh when he saw the girl drooling while sleeping. After a while, Hanel opened her eyes confused upon feeling someone touching her. At first, she didn't even think that her innocent request could make him hug her somehow while sleeping. The girl felt his hand gripping her tightly around the waist, and his breath tickled her neck. Besides that, she noticed an uncomfortable detail, so she had to get up and show her annoyance. The drunk boy was highly amused by how suddenly she started moving, so he asked her why she was doing that. She immediately scolded him for his audacity, but he just hugged her again and asked her to stay calm. However, his attempt to calm her ended up unexpectedly bringing their faces closer. Although the atmosphere became romantic, she was immediately distracted by the smell of alcohol and scolded him for drinking, touching his cheek. He rubbed her hand with such affection that the girl's heart sped up. Suddenly, she pulled away and told him that she remembered the past when he became so calm. As soon as she mentioned how cute he was as a child, he suddenly filled with unexpected energy. He gently slid his hand down her leggings and playfully asked her what that adorable thing he had as a child was. It seemed he particularly enjoyed this game that suddenly had emerged between them at that moment. That only made Hinal indignant and even more encouraged. So she suddenly said that he was always stuck to her like a shadow. She accepted the rules of the game and began sliding her hands over his body too, adding that he cried over anything. She tried to mention how he always hid behind her, but her actions forced her to stay quiet. Hanel noticed his brazen gaze, which awakened her own enthusiasm. But something made her quiet down again. At that instant, his body seemed so attractive to her that she couldn't help but keep looking at him. Observing him closely, she approached him and felt how fast his heart beat. They stood still for a moment, feeling how, once again, they crossed that dangerous line unexpectedly. She looked into his eyes again, while her hands continued to explore different places. She knew perfectly well where this was heading, and unintentionally, she pulled away, realizing that she was going against her initial decision. Even so, she was willing to take that step, although the only thing stopping her was the lack of protection. Minkhal knew it and proposed something that didn't include the main thing they usually did before. After a while, even though he promised not to do anything, all he did was kiss her everywhere. Surprisingly, what embarrassed her the most was that distracted gaze with which he looked at her while doing everything. She was surprised when, after asking him to stop biting her, he touched her again, pointing out that she liked it. Hanel blushed instantly, trying to show that it wasn't true. But the evidence he provided was irrefutable. Her comment made her so nervous that she automatically punched him in the most sensitive spot. Seeing how bad he felt because of her action, she immediately apologized for that sudden attack. Apparently, Minkal managed to endure the pain and held her ankle, asking her to be more careful. Even so, he was still trembling with pain. So he ended up saying that he had an important organ there. She passed her foot over him again and mentally noted that it was now softer than before. So the friction felt different. Minkal was dying of embarrassment while she concentratedly moved her foot between his legs. Hanel had to stop her entertaining activity when he suddenly called her. Although his random touches surprised her, she still felt pleasant sensations. For some reason, she remained still when he, very seriously, asked her what exactly she was doing. She was so engrossed in it that only now did she realize the true context of the situation. Meanwhile, Minji was still outside, where by chance she saw her son be. He greeted her with his usual smile, lying directly on the bench. She was surprised how freely he smoked in that position, wearing only a shirt in the middle of December. Yi Hui got up and shook himself off, asking why he wasn't with Hanel as usual. But she was already asleep after a heavy assignment. To her surprise, Minji took out the pack of cigarettes she was already used to, the same one she used to hide from her friends. She replied that yes, she also had that bad habit. Just like him. She explained that Hanel didn't like the smell of tobacco, but she still decided to ask why he was there, lying around in the middle of the night. Her question made him think, as he still didn't know how to put all his ideas together. Noticing that Minji remained silent, he suddenly asked her what her friend liked. It seems her question confused her so much that for a few seconds she didn't even know how to answer him. Meanwhile, Hanel was having a great time with her friend, whom she had so wanted to have close. Miss Nall was full of feelings he already knew, but that he could hardly control in that situation. As soon as she continued with what she was doing before, he couldn't help but wonder what was happening, since he had hinted to her to stop. However, Hanel only became bolder, because she herself enjoyed touching the boy that way. What caught her attention the most was Kim Min-cheol's reaction, who was trying his best not to show how he felt. Unintentionally, she thought she felt something similar to dominating the situation. And that didn't leave her indifferent either. As she suddenly pressed a little harder, the boy abruptly lowered. He felt a mix of many new sensations. That forced him to control himself even more not to reach the end. Minkal abruptly, but gently, took her leg and asked her to stop, saying it was enough. Hanel immediately started to worry, thinking she had hurt him, but he never confessed the real reason to her. He felt a mix of frustration and excitement because he knew he couldn't go beyond normal caresses. Knowing that this couldn't continue like this, he wrapped the girl in a blanket and told her that her curiosity wouldn't lead her to anything good. As soon as he asked if she had touched enough, she lowered her gaze and thought that she actually wanted to touch more. Laying her down next to him, Min-cheol, half sober, looked into her eyes thoughtfully, and then closed his own, saying that his eyes were closing. He suddenly suggested they go to sleep, since it was already quite late. She was surprised when he said that today. For the first time in a long time, he could sleep peacefully. Hanel moved restlessly and sat up, asking the half-asleep boy if he slept badly, to which he replied yes. She was even more surprised when he, half asleep, confessed that it was because she always appeared in his dreams. For some reason, that made the girl laugh. So she asked him how often that happened, and she knew that he dreamed of her all the time. She felt immense joy, and enthusiastically asked him if he really liked her so much as to dream of her all the time. What was her surprise when he, sincerely and without hesitation, replied yes, that he really liked her. At first, Hanel froze, as if she still couldn't believe that he could really like her as a woman. So she remained, sitting astonished next to Min-cheol, as if she were just now understanding the meaning of his words. After a few long seconds, she finally understood what he had said, and opened her mouth surprised. She was so happy to hear that he really liked her, that she couldn't contain her excitement, and started jumping around Minchul. Hannel felt her heart beating very fast, and sincerely confessed to him that she also liked him very much. To her misfortune, the boy was already asleep, and he didn't hear anything she said, which complicated things a bit. Seeing that he was sleeping soundly, she couldn't contain her annoyance, and shouted loudly at him, demanding he get up and listen to her confession. She shook him and slapped his face, trying to wake him up somehow. But none of that worked. The girl wanted so much for them to move to the next stage that she sat on top of him and shook him, demanding they start dating. She was so excited that she started trembling unintentionally, because he kept sleeping as if nothing was wrong. In the end, she sat by his bed until morning, waiting for him to finally wake up. Hannel was convinced that this was her chance to confess her feelings, and she couldn't let it pass. Although she didn't have time to prepare the gift as planned, she still wanted to start the relationship somehow. However, she was still surprised that, no matter how much she shook him, he wouldn't wake up. As if he were dead. She decided to try to wake him up again, and she poked his face with her finger. But he still didn't react. The girl started to get nervous because she had to go to her part-time job soon, and she couldn't miss it. Seeing Minji's call, she suddenly remembered that she had asked her to call and wake her up in case she slept too deeply. Although it was very hard for her to make the decision, she still got dressed and went to work, leaving Minchul. As if it were a joke of fate, the boy woke up just after hearing the sound of the front door closing. All that time, Hannel was so nervous that she couldn't stop biting her nails. Her behavior was so different from normal that her colleague Mihai couldn't help but notice. She saw her so restless that she looked like a puppy wanting to go out to pee. Naya understood that she had to distract her from that state somehow, and decided to ask her a couple of questions. The first thing she did was ask her why she had suddenly decided to work in the morning, and if she had plans for the evening. Hannel immediately replied, smiling, that today she was going to an alumni meeting, and that she needed to have the evening free. Furthermore, the girl surprised her very much by suddenly apologizing for her behavior and for having been rude. It was very hard for her to apologize. But even so, she apologized for getting angry at her over something trivial. Hannel instantly remembered that Miji looked very sad that day, and she rushed to ask her if something had happened to her. She was very surprised that she still cared about her, even after how badly she had behaved. However, Hannel gave her radiant smile again, and told her that it was normal to go through difficult times. Miji was stunned by the understanding shown by someone whom until recently she hated because of a boy. Although Hannel was younger than her, she still had enough wisdom to forgive and not get upset about what happened. Besides, she was really happy that her colleague had finally decided to apologize. So she hugged her tightly. Hannel started talking so sincerely about how much she resembled a cat that she didn't even notice how tightly she was squeezing her against her chest. Mighai was super embarrassed and couldn't get out of her steel hug until she told her she couldn't breathe. She tried to change the subject and asked her if she was really that happy about the upcoming alumni meeting. The girl was ready to share her happiness and asked her to come closer to tell her about that friend she had mentioned. She whispered to her that, apparently, they would start dating soon. And that was what had her so excited. Mihai saw how happy she was about that event, and couldn't help but be happy for her, and tell her that everything would go well for them. After a couple of long hours, the long-awaited night announcing the much-desired reunion finally arrived. Hannel and Minji arrived at the meeting place and started searching among the familiar crowd before them. They finally realized where they should go when the former class representative, Hyo Young, called them with a smile. The girls were happy to see their classmate, whom they hadn't seen in a long time due to preparing for university entrance exams. After exchanging a few kind words, they moved on and saw the rest of their former classmates. Hannel froze when, Suddenly, they asked her if Kim Min-chul shouldn't have come with her. Seeing that the boy wasn't replying to her friend's messages, Min-chul assumed he was still recovering from the hangover. Hanul agreed with the girl's assumption and, annoyed, she wondered aloud why he drank so much. What was her surprise when she looked up and saw Min-chul, who said he didn't expect to hear that precisely from her. As soon as he said it, everyone immediately looked at him, as if he were a local celebrity. They thought again about how handsome he was, and even that his hairstyle gave him an idle look. Meanwhile, Hyo Jong had already prepared the seats for them and suggested they sit at the table instead of staying in the aisle. The girl sitting next to her smiled warmly and told Hanul that there was an empty seat next to her. She thanked her for her kindness and thanked her for the invitation, preparing to accept it. However, in any case, she decided to sit next to Minji and ended up facing the purple-haired colleague. She looked attentively at her face again, trying to remember who that girl was, since she couldn't remember her name. Apparently, she noticed the confusion in her gaze and introduced herself as Jun So-hai, giving her another smile. After that, Hanul finally remembered who she was and returned the smile. She tried to soften the awkward situation and admitted that she hadn't recognized her with the new hair color and makeup, but Min-chul still didn't know who she was. After a while, her attention was captured by the large amount of delicious food filling the table. All that time, Min-chul couldn't stop noticing the looks from others, which he couldn't help but be annoyed by, while Min-jai's head was busy thinking about how they were looking at her. Min-chul felt irritation, and Hanul only thought about a love confession. The awkward silence was broken when one of the girls complimented Min-chul on how good his new hairstyle looked on him. The others gathered in a group around the boy and started asking him details about the dye, filling him with compliments. However, he didn't really like so much flattery, so he just thanked them and didn't answer the questions. Min-chul didn't miss the opportunity to address Hanul, who always made fun of his hair color and called him old. He smiled mischievously and repeated the comments about how good that hairstyle looked on him, something very different from what she thought. Normally, Hanul would respond to these kinds of comments with a mocking tone, but this time she couldn't say a word. The boy continued reminding her how she compared him to an old man and asked her if she was ready to retract. Although inside she felt that maybe she should, she still didn't want to agree with him in the argument. Jun So-hai kept observing their exchange attentively, which hadn't really changed much since middle school. Shortly before the meeting, she had thought about ways to make them fight, and now she was pondering the matter again. After a while, Hanyul looked at the menu thoughtfully, as if looking for something that wasn't there. She commented to Min-jae that she felt like eating something refreshing, but there was nothing of that sort on the menu. The girl asked Hyo-jong if the restaurant allowed bringing outside food, like ice cream. Upon receiving an affirmative answer, she went to the others to find out if they also wanted ice cream. After hearing their opinions, she got up and said that she would buy many different types for the 24 people present. The others were surprised to see her offer alone, doubting she could carry so much by herself. However, Min-chul immediately got up and went after his best friend. After that, a bunch of former classmates rushed Minji to ask her about her relationship. She raised her hands in a calming gesture and said she had nothing to tell them, since they had always been close. Although she herself felt like something had changed between them, she saw no point in talking about it, not getting new details. The others accepted the explanation, saying they only thought so because of the time they spent apart. Jun So-hai was one of the few who never tried to find out details about the personal lives of the two friends. Despite having kept silent for a long time, she suddenly blurted out that that closeness between them hadn't always existed. With a mischievous smile, she brought up the delicate topic of how they didn't get along at all in the first year of studies. Meanwhile, Min-chul and Hanul had finished buying ice cream and were ready to return. Hanul tried to convince the boy that the bags didn't weigh anything, but he took them from her anyway to carry them himself. Furthermore, he tapped her on the forehead with a can of Pepsi and offered it to her to drink. She became nervous when he showed her attention again, remembering that she didn't really like hangover drinks. Upon opening the can, Haenal attentively looked at Min Sheol and thought that maybe it was the time to tell him about her feelings. She tried to mention what he had told her the night before half asleep, but she found it very hard to get the words out. She barely remembered what had happened. She blushed and left the sentence half-finished. Min-kal didn't quite understand what she wanted to tell him and looked at her attentively, which made her even more nervous. She jumped when suddenly the same girl who said she was coming to see if they were okay appeared. Haenal was so surprised by the unexpected arrival of her former classmate that she unintentionally dropped the can of Pepsi. Jun So-hee approached her very carefully and asked her if she was okay. Her hands were completely covered in liquid, so she had to leave to wash them. Knowing where the bathroom was, she told them to go without waiting for her, that she would catch up after washing her hands. Not suspecting anything bad, Min Sheol told her sarcastically to be careful not to fall asleep in the bathroom again. The boy chuckled to himself, watching her run out towards the bathroom to clean the drink off herself. But his surprise was unpleasant when he turned around and saw that the other girl was looking at him. Left alone with him, she shuddered again, as if she were an annoying fly. When she demanded to know if he was dating Haenal, the boy ran his hand through his hair wearily and replied that they weren't dating. He demanded that they stop asking him that question. He froze when she suddenly said that it would be too brazen of him to date Haenal. Min-kal couldn't believe what he was hearing when he finally understood the real meaning of what she had said. Junso Hisalo smiled satisfied seeing his reaction, as if analyzing what to say next, while asking him to think about how much he had made her suffer in the past. The girl was already in the bathroom. She didn't even imagine that this former classmate would become the obstacle that could ruin their relationship. Min-kal couldn't believe she had the nerve to say something like that, and called her words nonsense. She sighed tiredly and asked him why he pretended not to understand, while he demanded that she not get on his nerves. Haenal couldn't wash her hands without first removing the wristband she had been wearing for years. Min-kal shuddered in surprise when the girl suddenly mentioned Haenal's left wrist. How much did it worry him? He froze, powerless to say anything, while his interlocutor continued manipulating his feelings and making him feel guilty. For all those years, Haenal wore a scar on her wrist that hid a sad story. The girl stood still, looking at the wet piece of fabric she didn't want to put on because she had accidentally gotten it wet. In the end, she put it in her pocket, thinking that no one would see the scar because of the long sleeves. Meanwhile, Min-kal remained paralyzed on the deserted street, while Jun So-hee continued to pressure him, since he didn't even remember her name. He tried to find out who she was to dare mention something like that. She just told him not to think that he and Haenal were the only ones in the world, that there were other people around him too. He was surprised when she casually mentioned that others had seen what happened that time at the hospital. Seeing that he remained paralyzed, she smiled venomously and asked him if he really thought everyone would forget what happened, as if nothing had happened. The girl reminded him of that page in his history that he never wanted to remember, trying to erase it from his memory. Jun So-hee suddenly said she understood perfectly, since Haenal is a wonderful girl. She added that, being close to someone like that, one can really feel like a good person. But Min Sheol was nothing like her. In his mind, returned those memories of Haenal crying in the hospital. Being a patient, it seemed Jun So-hee enjoyed influencing Min Sheol by using his own memories and managing to make him feel guilty. The boy felt so much rage that, gritting his teeth, he demanded that she think about what she was saying. However, his furious appearance didn't scare her much, and she felt completely in control of the situation. She pretended not to hear him and suddenly started talking about how Janel is good, and she wouldn't be disappointed upon discovering his cowardly side. Her unpleasant smile didn't fade as she spoke with pleasure about how surely he would accept her just as he is. Making a gesture with her fists. With the same expression, she wished him luck in his affairs. It seemed that after those words, he sank even deeper into himself. But he had to startle upon hearing a familiar voice. Hanel ran up to the group of people, asking why they hadn't left, and were still waiting. She didn't even imagine what they were talking about. And as always, she greeted them with her warm smile. And radiant. However, Minchul felt so much confusion and inner sadness that he couldn't say a word. Jun So-hee, as if nothing happened, said they had decided to wait for her to return so they could leave together. She tried to suggest they go back to the venue right then. But the girl stood still for a second, remembering something important. The smile disappeared from Jun So-hye's face when she heard they needed to talk, and that she should leave them alone for a couple of minutes. Even so, she couldn't refuse and said she would go ahead, taking the bags of ice cream first, ensuring they were alone. Hanel finally felt she could sincerely confess her feelings to her friend. He noticed the significant gaze, full of shyness and affection, with which she observed him. But he was thinking about something else. The girl led him behind the nearest corner so they could talk about what worried her in a more comfortable setting. After making sure no one was watching on the street, she turned when he asked her what important thing she wanted to talk about. Hanel lowered her gaze again and hesitantly asked him if he remembered what happened yesterday. Apparently, Mincheol had drunk so much that day that he either didn't remember what he said, or now he was pretending not to remember. He tried to remain calm and told her he wasn't ashamed if she intended to scold him for not answering her calls. The boy clenched his fist tightly, trying to behave as usual, as if nothing had changed. She immediately became disheartened, seeing that he remembered nothing. But she still decided to move forward. Hanyul tried to say what she wanted so much, but she realized she couldn't even open her mouth. Mingkal observed her attentively, noticing how difficult it was for her to pronounce those very important words. She was so nervous that, besides her voice, her legs were trembling from embarrassment and nerves. Hanel was making a huge effort to finally confess her feelings, encouraging herself mentally. Suddenly, she felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, and she was falling quickly because her legs were shaking so much. Luckily, Mincheol managed to catch her just in time and didn't let her fall onto the asphalt. He tried to scold her, but she only paid attention to his gaze, which hid a lot of emotions. Mingkal pressed her against him with annoyance, about to lose patience, but she was only surprised by how beautiful his eyes were. As soon as she got lost in them again, her loving heart started beating stronger. Furthermore, the fact that his hand was so firm on her waist made the emotions even more intense. Although at that moment, it was the last thing she wanted. He couldn't pull away when she suddenly hugged him. The boy immediately demanded she explain what she was doing, and if she had gone crazy. But she had a very different conversation in mind. Her hand slowly moved down when she suddenly looked him straight in the eyes and sincerely confessed that she liked him. If it weren't for the conversation with Jun So-hye, she would probably have felt like the happiest person in the world. But now that seemed impossible. All this time, he thought he knew his place and expected nothing, not imagining that one day she would confess to him. His face showed so much discomfort and surprised that the whole atmosphere of student romance and secret love disappeared for Hanel. Mitchell suddenly pulled away from the girl abruptly, making her think that this was not the reaction she expected. He loved Hanel with all his heart and considered himself horrible and unworthy of the love of such a good girl. And bright. The very next instant, he froze her to the core, coldly asking her why she liked him. She couldn't believe what she was hearing when he did the unthinkable, telling her with certainty that she was just confused about her feelings. Hanny immediately demanded an explanation, asking what kind of answer that was, since she had gathered the courage to confess her feelings to him. The girl trembled when he suddenly said he didn't intend to date her. She grabbed him by the hoodie and asked him if he was truly scared that she had decided to confess what she felt. Hanel could see that Minkal didn't want to talk and just averted his gaze in shame, not wanting to say the real reason. She addressed him again and assured him that she liked him too, something he himself had said the day before. Minkal couldn't understand what she was talking about because he didn't remember anything he had said yesterday. Since he was drunk, he immediately hurried to cover her mouth when she shouted that people don't do what they did if they don't like each other. Hanel moved his hand away and told him decisively that at first they tried to pretend nothing was happening between them. He was speechless when she added that they didn't succeed, which already proved that their feelings existed. Minchal felt real fear and couldn't answer anything to her questions about what he felt for her. Despite all of Hanel's attempts, he just reminded her how she had said they did everything out of simple curiosity. That left the girl so shocked that for a couple of seconds she couldn't say a word. Besides that, the final blow was when Minkal suddenly turned around, wanting to leave. She tried to stop him, grabbed his sleeve, and asked him to wait, but all he wanted was to escape. The girl judged him in her mind for leaving her an impossible-to-erase scar, and for behaving like a coward, although deep down she didn't want to let him go. However, in an instant, she realized that everything was a disaster when she saw his cold gaze. And piercing. What filled the cup was when he rejected her feelings, pushing her hand away when she tried to stop him. Suddenly, Hanel realized that she had unintentionally stumbled upon what she feared so much, and felt like she could lose him. Minchal thought the same as her, but he was so scared that he couldn't do anything about it. This is how he left her, finally asking her to stop trying to hold him back. In the end, Hanel felt so lost that she couldn't think of anything better than to return. Minji immediately noticed that she had returned alone, without Minchal, which already seemed quite strange to her. The abandoned girl tried to explain as best she could that he had something urgent to do, and that's why he decided to leave early. Apparently, her best friend could barely believe her, and suspected that something wasn't right. She was surprised that he had left without his jacket in that cold, and Hanel couldn't help but agree. Minji sensed that behind her usual laugh hid something that made her feel like her heart was breaking into pieces. Hanel tried to convince herself that he was just in shock, and that they would still have a chance to talk. She didn't even imagine that the girl responsible for her breakup was sitting next to her at the table, smiling satisfied. The next day, the girl waited outside the university, waiting for Minchal to finish classes. The wait felt eternal, so she kept walking from one side to the other while waiting for her friend. She greeted the boy cheerfully as soon as she saw him coming down the stairs. Hanel ran towards him and, as always, scolded him for leaving yesterday without her. She tried to stop him and force him to listen to her, but he just walked on with indifference. At that moment, she felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces again, because he didn't even want to talk to her. She immediately turned around, not understanding what was happening, as if everything were a nightmare. The girl knew that any attempt to stop him would be useless, and she could only watch him walk away. At that moment, she suddenly thought that maybe they wouldn't see each other again, something she had never considered before. She knew that sometimes, after a failed confession, people stop talking, and she had already seen cases like that. Even so, she couldn't believe that would happen to them, because she was sure that he loved her too. She wanted to stop him and ask what was going on, but she was so devastated that she couldn't even move. Hanel knew they could never be like before, but she greatly feared that everything would get even worse. She felt alone in the world, rejected by the person she truly loved, and with all her heart. At that moment, Yehai Zunbi was saying goodbye to his classmates, preparing to leave the university. While walking, he saw Hanel by chance, and he didn't imagine how she felt at that moment. He greeted her with his hand and his usual smile, but she was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't respond. The boy looked at her attentively, and for the first time, he noticed the tears on the face of the always cheerful and radiant Hanel. He was so surprised by what he saw that he froze with his hand raised. Fearing to approach, Yehai noticed that she was staring fixedly at a point, as if waiting for someone, and then lowered her head sadly. Seeing that very sad scene, his heart started beating faster, and he wondered why he was reacting like that. Before, he wanted to see her cry, but now he just felt his heart drop to the floor. It seemed that new feelings were arising inside him, those that arise when someone close suffers. Trying to understand why she was crying, he saw Minkal in the distance, and an idea immediately occurred to him. This is how he ended up between a rock and a hard place, feeling how feelings awakened in his soul for the one who sincerely loved another.